Chapter 803. Hearing the arrogant reply of the broken metal ship, the merchants and militants in the smuggling ship looked at each other, thinking, you don't want anything from a man, and you don't want anything from a woman. What the F***CK do you want? Thinking of the terrible speed of the broken metal spaceship, the strong impact force, the thick outer armor, and the extremely strange request of the other party, the people who had been badly injured in the previous dozens of collisions suddenly remembered a rumor that had been circulating in the Bermuda sector in recent months. Several groups of smugglers claimed that they had been robbed on the route. The spaceship that carried out the robbery was extremely powerful, but the owner of the spaceship had a bad taste that was most hated by the people of Bermuda. The other party seemed to be particularly interested in mechanical things. In addition, even those beautiful women who were worthy of Lin Banshan, he was not willing to take a second look at them. The leader of the militants swallowed a mouthful of saliva and moved closer to the smuggler. Looking at the broken spaceship that seemed to be dancing at a high speed and showing off its terrifying mobility, he lowered his voice and said, "Surrender. I heard that this spaceship has been in the left sky sector for the past 2 years. Even those guys in the Empire who were escorted by warships did not have any chance to fight back." The smuggler's body trembled slightly, and it did not take long for him to resolutely and honorably surrender. Since the other party allowed him to enter the escape capsule and did not want any goods, then even if he could not move the modified guns, he could still take the most expensive diamonds and recoup some losses. The smuggler, who was preparing to enter the escape capsule, looked back at the spaceship that he had spent a lot of money to build reluctantly and painfully. Suddenly, he found that the broken metal spaceship in space began to dance again. He could not help but curse in a low voice, "F***CKU. Will you die if you don't show off?" In the dark and quiet space, the broken metal spaceship was trembling violently. The bloated body of the spaceship that could not be described with words was tumbling at a high speed in the thousands of kilometers of space, continuously making countless incredible flight movements. However, it did not seem to be showing off. Instead, it was more like a human brain that was being pierced by countless steel needles at the same time, and it was holding its head and struggling in pain. The dilapidated metal spaceship was exactly the tri-winged Bureau of Proclamation that had transported Sulu into the Imperium. Nominally, the spaceship still belonged to the Federation Bureau of Proclamation, but in fact, it had long become a toy controlled by the old man's consciousness. The tri-winged spaceship lurked in the Imperium's star system for an entire year, breaking through the colorful clouds and rescuing Sulu from the siege. In the end, it was shot and forced to crash on a desolate mineral planet. Through some unknown method, the spaceship completed its self-repair and restarted. After leaving the Imperium, it came to the strange and curious Bermuda Triangle star system and resumed its old job of looting. Until a moment ago, a cold mechanical voice sounded from inside the three-winged warship. According to the highest additional clause of the Charter's core law, all physical operations are prohibited. All of the data in the tri-winged ship returned to zero, returning to silence. After the ship trembled violently and struggled in pain, it quietly floated in the dark space of the universe. The smugglers and militants who were preparing to leave in the escape capsules noticed the anomaly of the ragged metal spaceship. After a long, nervous silence, someone speculated, "Is something wrong with the spaceship? What problem could there be? I don't know. Maybe it lost power? Boss, I think we should try to sneak away. Looking at the condition of that ragged spaceship, I don't think it can be started anymore. What if that despicable guy is playing with us again?" The smuggler's thoughts were obviously too complicated. Let's drive towards him first. Even if there's something wrong, we can say that we're intimidated by his aura and take the initiative to drive the ship closer. I think with that guy's arrogance, he would like to hear this kind of explanation. Besides, I've never heard an expert say that this ship has killed anyone before. Under the temptation of huge profits and the encouragement of the ragged spaceship's silence, the people returned to their posts and slowly drove the smuggler's spaceship toward the tri-winged warship, mentally prepared to flatter and explain at all times. However, the tri-winged warship did not respond at all. quietly floating in space just like that. Looks like there is really a problem. Boss, let's go. Someone shouted excitedly. The smuggler took a deep breath, waved his arm, and said, "Wealth comes from danger. Drag this thing back." The militant leader looked at him in panic and stopped him. "This is too risky." The smuggler frowned, silently looked at the motionless, ragged metal spaceship, and said without confidence, "I have a feeling that this guy is dead." The militants did not understand this sentence, and the merchant himself did not understand why he said that. The metal spaceship, quietly floating in space, was not alive to begin with, so how could it be dead? However, looking at the ragged spaceship, he suddenly felt that the smell of death coming from it made him very uncomfortable, even a little sad. He really wanted to hear that arrogant and funny voice again. Shaking his head, the merchant drove these strange emotions out of his mind, waved his hand expressionlessly, and said, "Drag it back, dismantle it, and sell it." Facing the autumn wind, the little white flower bloomed wildly in the mountains beside the railway. The SCC global surveillance system in the cockpit vaguely captured an anomaly dozens of kilometers away. Wearing a helmet, Sulu was about to perform the next step of data enhancement and asked the old man what he found when his voice rang in his mind. "Sulu, not long ago, I started a dream, a very, very long dream. In the dream, I can clearly feel the color of the flowers and the feeling of being blown by the morning wind. I can smell the fragrance of number 37 brand cigarettes. I can taste the fruit and wood of one June number 2. It's not like before where I can only see the microscopic structure of the flowers, calculate the direction and level of the wind, or analyze the heavy metal content in the rotten cigarettes you smoke, or the boring and monotonous alcohol content in the brewing process. Philip, my dear, this is a good thing." Sulu stared at the near-pupil light screen and said, "According to the little knowledge I have in front of you, only a complete and independent consciousness can dream and sleep. It's very good that you have these feelings. Maybe one day in the future, you can have a girlfriend or something. Why not have a boyfriend?" The old man asked in confusion. "Because Philip is obviously a man's name." The old man mumbled something very vaguely, and then he continued to express the feelings of an artistic youth, which was very rare. "It's because it's good that I'm afraid. I'm very worried that I won't be able to dream in the future." "You won't. The number of times you dream is infinitely more than me." Sulu was like a computer friend, patiently answering the old man's questions, as if he was comforting a child who had just learned to think about death on a rainy day. "Sulu." "Yes." "Sulu, there's an ambush in front of us. There are ambushes everywhere. This is a trap." "Ambush where?" Sulu's pupils shrank slightly, and the nervousness before the battle began to enter his sensitive body. "They are everywhere." Following these 4 words, Sulu's brain suddenly buzzed with a muffled sound. In the world that is left I could see, countless images suddenly appeared, flying in from every corner, everywhere. Complicated blueprints of mechanical structures, whimsical interior design of the engine, screenshots of asterisk, 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 asterisk in different poses, erotic pictures of beautiful female bodies on full display, and densely packed light dots with citizen numbers hanging in the building, maintaining that posture in the forest. Countless images danced in his mind like snowflakes, occupying everything in an instant. Sulu remembered these images. In the black dream on the hospital bed, in the spring recruitment exam of Nutshell Company, in the black prison of Fox Fortress Prison, on the battlefield filled with smoke and death. At this moment, these images flooded his eyes again, as if he was summing up his memories, or perhaps some kind of memorial. His fingers slowly released the control stick, and the little white flower mecha that was moving at high speed beside the railway slowly slowed down. In the next moment, the countless images in his mind were accompanied by a clear and heart-palpitating, tearing sound. Countless cracks appeared, and then they flew in all directions, like sheets of white snow coming and going like sheets of butterflies, not leaving behind a single trace. In the void, the Federal Central Computer said one last sentence with a voice that was already beginning to become cold and mechanical. "You must remember, my name is Philip, In the rustling autumn wind, the little white flower Mecca silently stopped in the mountains beside the railway. Sharp alarms began to ring in the dim cockpit, but Sulu only remained silent, not moving at all. Extremely far away at the edge of the atmosphere, several missiles were currently approaching at high speed. Even further away, outside the atmosphere, the Federation battleship that had just completed emergency maintenance began to conduct crystal transition guidance, preparing to fire its second main cannon. In the uninhabited mountains, dozens of square kilometers around the little white flower Mecca, more than 100 black and misty Mecca, slowly stood up from the pits in the autumn forest. The heavy Mecca that glowed with a metallic luster instantly tore apart the peace between heaven and earth, releasing a wave of terrifying killing intent. Following the silent transmission of radio waves, countless heavy equipment began to be activated. The soldiers in camouflage lifted the shield covering on the dense formation, silently and quickly preparing for battle. Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7 Division finally made a shocking appearance. However, the silver-white Mecca beside the railway did not move at all. At least in the first few seconds, the little white flower Mecca slightly turned the detector above it to look at the pale and vast autumn sky, as if it was watching in place of the small-eyed man inside. Since the beginning of that black dream, Sulu had used the chip behind his neck to bicker, chat, and daze with that guy, and they had fought together. In a sense, their flesh and blood were connected, and their souls were connected. At this moment, he knew very clearly that the old thing, no, he should be called Philip, had left. Just as he had a name, he left, as if he had passed away as soon as he was born. Su Li's body began to feel cold, and he completely did not notice the shocking appearance of the Iron 7 Division in the mountains around him. He only narrowed his eyes, listening to his heavy and clear breathing in the quiet cockpit, searching for the silent and enigmatic breathing. Chapter 804. No matter what kind of life form it was, as long as you had lived, you would die one day. In different corners of the universe, it could even be said that this story had been sent out on every radio wave of the Federation, and once again, it proved this truth coldly and mercilessly. President Pabre, who had quietly returned to the capital on Federation 1, did not pay attention to any government affairs at all today. Since he entered the official residence, he had been sitting silently in the Oval Office. During this time, the official resident staff had been begging him to go to the Doomsday Base in the suburbs, or at least move to the underground fortification of the official residence. But no matter how intense the attitude of the staff was, and even turned into begging in the end, the president refused to agree and insisted on sitting in the Oval Office to wait. He firmly believed that if the situation in the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation really developed in a bad direction and the Federation faced an unpredictable great danger, as the president of the Federation, he had to stick to his job. And when his business partners were in the midst of a whirlpool of danger, as a man, he had to accompany them. The phone finally rang. In the quiet Oval Office, other than President Pabre, only the official residence office director, Breen, was left. The president waved his hand to stop Breen from picking up the phone. He walked to the table with vigorous strides that did not match his age and picked up the phone. Without saying anything, President Pabre slowly hung up the phone. On his calm, dark face, the emotions in his eyes were unusually complicated. Director Breen, who had just learned all the secrets last night, could not judge whether the result was good or bad from his emotions. He did not dare to ask, so he could only nervously watch him from the side. "Give me a cigarette." President Pabre took the cigarette from Breen's hand and lit it. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Life is a drama, sad or happy, but the plot that reality shows us is often more complicated and bizarre than the drama." Director Breen got the answer he wanted from this rare scene of the president smoking. His somewhat stiff body immediately relaxed, and he shook his head and sighed. The biggest regret now is that Lady Tai and the others did not choose to completely stand on Su Li's side in this war, at least on the surface evidence. Otherwise, this would have been your best chance. Then, he shrugged and said regretfully. Although the conservatism of the big families is disgusting, they have indeed avoided many fatal crises. President Pabre slowly sucked on the cigarette between his thick and long fingers and did not reply. After a long silence, he said solemnly, "In fact, what I regret the most is that someone like Colonel Su Lu is actually a citizen of the Imperium and not a citizen of the Federation." After a period of close monitoring, Cui Zedong confirmed that the core of the charter computer had returned to its original point, and that the mechanical life had disappeared without a trace. Cui Zedong wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and removed the self-destruct warning program inside the Bureau of Proclamation. Most of the staff in the Bureau of Proclamation building did not know what had happened in the underground core, but seeing the security level drop instantly, the inside of the building, which had been shrouded in a tense atmosphere for many days, suddenly seemed a lot more relaxed. On the small balcony of the building that looked at the green meadow, Li Jiedu raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the meadow that glowed white under the blazing autumn sun, he slowly said, "Actually, from the beginning, I walked into a wrong place. The investigation process of the Macklin case gave me some kind of inertial thinking. At that time, the Bureau of Proclamation was investigating Macklin. The Westwoods Military District was in charge of investigating the Bermuda human trafficking records. The 2nd Military District was in charge of going deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to look for biological markers, and Lin Banshan was in charge of the most critical part." Cui Zedong wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "This time, neither the Westwoods Military District nor Lin Banshan will cooperate with us to investigate Su Lu, so we can only follow the path of biological markers. Last time, the Special Forces went deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to dig up the graves of Macklin's parents. After confirming that Macklin was not related to his parents by blood, they started the investigation. And we tried to find the biological marker of Su Li's sister, Xian Yi, but we kept failing. This line of thinking was a stupid mistake," Li Jiedu said calmly. "Now we can confirm that the Empire's seed program is divided into 2 batches. Macklin is in the first batch, and Su Lu is in the second batch. All the seeds are members of the Empire's royal bloodline. Since this is the case, it is easy to confirm. So you thought of using Su Li's biological marker and the Macklin's biological marker collected by the Bureau of Proclamation to do a direct comparison." Cui Zedong sighed. Looking at the partner he had known for many years beside him, he suddenly felt that this face had become extremely unfamiliar. He could not understand why he was so sure that there was a problem with Su Li's identity so many days ago. He could not understand how he could think of a method that no one else would think of to deprive Su Lu of his authority, and even successfully force the charter computer to restart and restore due to a conflict in its core program. The most crucial part of this operation that Cui Zedong could not understand was, how could Li Jiedu connect a Federation hero to an Empire seed? From Su Li's experience of escaping in the Left Sky Galaxy, it could be seen that the Empire had no plans to awaken this seed. It was even very likely that the Empire did not know that he was that seed. This was equivalent to saying that Su Lu knew that he was from the Empire, but the Empire did not know that Su Lu was from the Empire, but Li Jiedu was sure that he was from the Empire. How did Li Jiedu come to such a shocking conclusion? Was it just intuition? Cui Zedong absolutely did not believe in the existence of such a miraculous thing, but Li Jiedu did not explain, and he did not dare ask. Thinking back to when Li Jiedu was facing the danger of the Federation being destroyed at any time underground, Cui Zedong's heart was filled with infinite respect and fear. He asked, "Removing Su Li's authority was all part of your plan, but what about the Federal Central Computer?" Li Jiedu silently looked at the meadow below the balcony. He took out a cigarette from his military uniform pocket, lowered his head, and lit it. "I'm not good at dealing with mechanical existences like computers, but if it turns into a person, then I have a way to destroy it." Cui Zedong was so shocked by these words that he could not speak for a very long time. He forced himself to calm down and asked with a trembling voice, "But have you ever thought that if the result of a conflict in the core program is not to cause it to restart and restore, or even destroy, but to allow it to completely break the three core laws. The world we live in will be instantly destroyed by it. If the situation is allowed to continue like this, the federal central computer will inevitably destroy or rule over human society. I was just taking a gamble, and now it seems that the result is not bad. Lee Jae-do said, "Of course, maybe one day it will wake up again, but I believe that should be a matter of tens of thousands of years. Human society needs to prepare for it one more day." Choi Judong had once experienced that soul-stirring 7 seconds with the old director. He had been suffering for the past 2 years, so he was fully mentally prepared for this matter. However, even he had almost broken down when he was underground. Even now, his back was still wet, and beads of sweat kept oozing from his forehead. So he could not understand why Lee Jae-do could be so calm. Lee Jae-do unbuttoned the collar of his military uniform and looked at the lawn, smoking silently. His fingers holding the cigarette did not tremble at all. He looked abnormally calm. There was obviously some abnormal smoke on the balcony of the Bureau of Proclamation building. General Lee Jae-do and Director Choi Judong, who had just experienced a major incident, did not notice that the cigarette between someone's fingers was upside down. The high-density cigarette was spasming in the flames, giving off an extremely unpleasant burnt smell. The alarm of the SCC's all-encompassing surveillance system continued to wail. On the close-up screen, one could even see the nearest black MX mecha appear in the valley. Sulu, who was in the dim cockpit of the little white flower MXD, woke up in the shortest amount of time. He began to breathe rapidly, trying to take in as much oxygen as possible to nourish his currently dry lungs and prepare for the life-or-death battle that was about to come. Deep breaths echoed in the cockpit. Those were the breaths of a life-and-death struggle, the breaths of spasming flames, the breaths of dancing on the tip of a blade, the breaths of a dying comet. Note, the white clouds in the sky also seemed to be breathing, stirring restlessly. In the cockpit, Sulu narrowed his eyes, recalling the 4 words the old man had said before he left. They are everywhere. He vaguely felt an unprecedented sense of danger and pressed the red button without hesitation. Crackle, crackle, crackle. The heavy metal components began to peel off one after another in an extremely short amount of time. This process could even be described as laser firing. The little white flower, MXD Mecha's 4 strikes of the autumn forest, and the fields were now a mess. Just as the little white flower officially entered overclocking mode, the white clouds in the sky suddenly scattered. A milky white pillar of light descended from the sky, carrying with it a terrifying energy of destruction. It stole the light of the autumn sun and directly blasted towards the silver-white MXD mecha on the ground. The MXD moved first. In a situation where there was no threat at all, just relying on his beast-like instinct for danger, Sulu let out a muffled groan and instantly pushed the mecha to maximum speed. There seemed to be no sound, no explosion, but a black hole about 1 meter in diameter appeared in the autumn forest. The hole was unusually neat and smooth, and no one knew how deep it was. Any material existence that stood here was turned into ashes by the main cannon of the Federation's battleship. The silver-white MXD mecha landed miserably at the edge of the deep hole, a terrifying gap appearing in its thick left arm, sparks flying everywhere. In the next second, the right arm of the MXD mecha slammed heavily into the soil in front of it, causing the heavy body of the mecha to float up like a fallen leaf. While the huge mecha was still in the air, the twin engines behind its waist roared loudly and the turbochargers were fully activated. The tip of its mechanical feet lightly touched the ground, and it completed an unbelievably perfect drift in the air, instantly moving 140 meters to the side. Amidst the shrill sound of air braking, several live Fire Type 3 missiles shot towards the fields at high speed. Under Su Lee's almost crazy high-speed control, Little White Flower, which had entered an overclock state, exploded with all its power at this moment, dodging randomly in the mountains at a terrifying speed, always maintaining the possibility of escaping the explosion range in an instant. At this moment, the heavy mecha was no longer like a light leaf, but more like a whistling silver bullet. A huge roar sounded. The automatic tracking system was unable to lock onto the MXD's missiles, so it chose the most effective area to land, causing a series of violent explosions. Flames mixed with black smoke rose into the air, and the field gradually became clear. The silver-white MXD had narrowly avoided 2 consecutive waves of attacks that seemed impossible to avoid, but it had also paid a heavy price. The mecha's body was severely damaged, especially its left mechanical leg. During this period of time, the 100 black MX mechas of the Iron 7th Division completed their tactical deployment. They silently and solemnly appeared around the mountains, looking at the silver-white MXD that could fall at any time. The voice of the commander of the Iron 7th Division, Du Xiaoqing, rang out through the military battlefield through the military field loudspeaker, echoing in everyone's ears. Sulu, the charter computer has confirmed that you are from the Empire. I suggest that you do not make any more pointless resistance. The MXD mecha was silent for a very long time. Suddenly, its 2 mechanical arms crossed in front of a mountain in the distance. This was the crudest swear word in the machine language. Immediately after, Su Li's angry roar rang out from the silver-white mecha's external loudspeaker. Du Xiaoqing, your mother is from the Empire. Chapter 805. The angry roar echoed in the empty mountains. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division, hidden in the autumn forest, couldn't help but show shock on their serious faces. Su Li's direct cursing of his teacher's mother was infuriating, but what really touched their mental state was the cold words their teacher had said. Colonel Su Lu was from the Empire? None of the Federation soldiers in the mountains believed it. The Iron 7th Division and the new 17th Division had never seen eye to eye with each other. Even from the time when Park Ji-ho was sent to the training base, to the time when they graduated from the Japanese Army Performance, to the time when Dong Feng-yu, the leader of the 1st Regiment, was in a very difficult situation, until the time when Shimin Jin was killed, the soldiers who carried out the secret military operation of the government would never refuse the order from their superiors to kill Su Lu. However, they would never believe that this guy was actually from the Empire. On the tracks in the mountains outside the ambush circle, 100 black MXD mechas stood silently among the falling leaves. Many of the Iron 7th Division soldiers subconsciously slowed down their preparation for the concentrated fire and stared blankly at the silver-white MXD mecha in the distance. For this iron-made army, it was unprecedented for them to be in such a state in the middle of an intense battle. From this, it could be seen that Du Xiaoqing saying that Su Lu was from an empire had a strong psychological impact on the soldiers in the mountains. Outside the deep pit of the mountain in the distance, behind the green-yellow camouflage screen, was the temporary headquarters of the Iron 7th Division today. Du Xiaoqing took off the sunglasses on his high-nose bridge, and his cold voice once again reached the silver-white mecha in the middle of the ambush through the microphone. Sulu, look at your authority. You should know what happened. This is a Federation planet. As a seat of the Empire, you have no chance of surviving. Wake up. In the dimly lit cockpit, Su Lu, whose face was covered by the helmet, was silent for a while. The corners of his lips that were exposed outside could not help but curl up, revealing a somewhat neurotic sneer. He knew that his high-level charter authority had been completely removed. Because there was no reason, he knew that the silent old thing should have left him forever. How dare you say you're from the Empire? This is just a battle. Why would you, Du Xiaoqing, use such a lowly and vicious method to destroy my will and arouse the desire of innocent soldiers to fight? What the F***CK? Did you think that I would stupidly surrender just because of this? Sulu took an extremely long and deep breath. Fast was the speed, and long was the feeling. The oxygen that was several times more than what an ordinary person could bear was poured into his exaggeratedly expanded lungs. Then it began to burn. It burned painfully, and the energy was transmitted to every part of his body. The muscle fibers all over his body began to tremble slightly, preparing for battle. forcefully suppressing the sadness and emptiness brought about by the old man's disappearance. Su Lu hesitated for a very short time. He did not remove the chip behind his neck because he could not judge whether he could withstand the intense pain at this level and not fall unconscious. Moreover, he believed that if the old man had truly left this world, the charter computer would definitely not perform any physical operations, so it should not be a direct threat to himself and the little white flower mecha. Sulu very clearly and sadly confirmed that although the old man and the charter computer shared the same name, they were definitely not the same kind of existence. The former was a soul, while the latter was just an unconscious shell. The tiny camouflage chip behind his neck represented the past few years he had spent with that soul. This was probably one of the reasons why he did not remove it. Using his fastest speed, he blocked all remote controls and unlocked the onboard computer. Through the close-range view screen and the SCC global surveillance system, he silently watched the Federation mecha that covered the entire mountain, as well as the tight encirclement that seemed to be cast from iron in the distance. Feng Yu had once told him in the tunnel that the most dangerous place was also the safest place. However, this sentence had only been believed 3 times. Su Lu remembered it well and carried it out cautiously during this period of time. He had only used Charter Square and Parliament Hill twice. When operating the mecha, Su Lu always felt that his entire body was filled with great power, as if he was omnipotent. To him, the dim cockpit of the mecha was the safest place he felt. However, at this moment, in the face of despair, he knew that the safest place was often the most dangerous place. This was a battle without any hope, but he still had to fight. Su Lu pushed the control stick heavily, and the silver-white MXT mecha roared out. The heavy alloy mechanical arm slammed heavily into the middle of the black mecha's cockpit with a loud bang. In a moment that could not be seen clearly by the naked eye, the silver-white MXT mechanical arm vibrated 24 times in a row. The alloy layer of the seemingly indestructible black mecha's cockpit armor suddenly became fatigued and deformed, tearing apart with a crack. The onboard central control core was directly crushed into a cloud of sparks. The dual engines and turbochargers worked together. The silver-white MXT, which had entered an overclock state, retreated 20 meters in an instant with a shrill whistle of breaking wind. It avoided the concentrated fire of a powerful Darlin's cannon and directly knocked 2 Iron 7 Division MX mecha out of the air. With a boom, the 2 thick mechanical legs of the silver-white MXT landed heavily on the soft ground. The heavily damaged left mechanical leg let out a terrifying thud. The internal balance meter of the mechanical leg could not respond in such a short time. The tall body of the mecha slowly tilted to the right, looking like it could fall over at any time. Just as the silver-white MXT mecha landed on the ground with inhuman speed, another 2 Iron 7 Division black mecha made a precise prediction. They calculated that the damage to the MXT mecha would definitely affect its next step of continuous operation, and they rushed over at high speed and valiantly. One of the black mecha leapt into the air, a sharp alloy blade extended from its right mechanical arm, and viciously stabbed down at the silver-white MXT's cockpit. The other black mecha pounced at the back of the silver-white MXT at high speed. The 2 mechanical arms quickly closed together, and the dual engines suddenly roared to the maximum output, not giving the MXT any chance to escape. At the same time, the armor on the right shoulder of the mecha flipped open, revealing the main cannon. It was actually preparing to fire at such a close distance. The battle broke out in an instant. 2 black MX mecha had already fallen to the ground. The ace pilots of the Iron 7 Division once again witnessed the power and terror of Colonel Su Lu and the MXT. There was no room for thought. The pilots even subconsciously activated the most tragic method of mutual destruction. In the dim cockpit, Su Li's face was expressionless. His right hand flicked on the touchscreen like lightning. His body, which was suspended halfway on the control panel, suddenly tensed up and then began to tremble violently. The physiological signals passed through his skin and, through the translation of the simulation system, quickly entered the mecha's central control computer. On the autumn field, the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division could only see the silver-white mecha, which seemed to have been forced into a desperate situation, suddenly begin to tremble violently. The violent tremors directly broke apart the black mecha's tightly clasped, thick mechanical arm. Then, without warning, the silver-white MXT lifted its heavily damaged left mechanical leg and viciously stomped it backwards. It was unknown how Su Lu, who was in the cockpit, had located the position of the mecha behind him in such an intense high-speed battle. His left mechanical leg accurately and viciously stomped on the inner side of the black mecha's mechanical leg. The powerful force penetrated the sturdy outer armor, directly shattering the black mecha's internal balancer. The incomparably fierce black mecha of the Iron 7 Division had its mechanical leg violently broken apart. Then, its balancer was completely destroyed. The heavy and tall body of the mecha could not be controlled at all. It abruptly fell backwards. The main cannon on its right shoulder activated, and at this moment, it fired fiercely. However, it had already lost the target that was just inches away. With a loud boom, a beautiful bullet burst out, brushing past the silver-white MXT's shoulder as it shot into the endless autumn sky. The silver-white MXT took advantage of the kinetic energy from the landing of its left mechanical leg to abruptly retreat backwards. With a loud, muffled boom, the silver-white MXT had actually used the powerful momentum to directly send the black mecha behind it flying. In the process of taking advantage of the momentum to retreat, the silver-white MXT had easily avoided the cold light of the black mecha in front of it. It had even opened up a distance of 30 meters between it and its opponent. However, to everyone's surprise, the silver-white MXT did not choose to take the opportunity to turn around and attempt to break out of the encirclement. Instead, with the deafening roar of its twin engines, it performed an action that defied the laws of physics. In an instant, it had changed from retreating to charging forward. In an extremely short amount of time, it had crossed the vast field and arrived in front of the black mecha, which was rapidly adjusting its posture because the alloy blade had missed its target. With a crisp sound, the sharp alloy blade shot out from the front end of the silver-white MXT's right mechanical arm at lightning speed, making a low hum in the autumn wind. In the next instant, the silver-white MXT's body turned slightly. The sharp alloy blade at the front end of the right mechanical arm pierced into the black mecha's head in a simple, clear, and unstoppable manner. Then, with a smooth clockwise turn, sparks flew out from the contact point between the alloy blade and the black mecha. For all humanoid mecha, the head part, which was oddly small compared to the wide and thick body of the mecha, was responsible for some extremely important work. For example, infrared sensors and helical sensors were all inside, but they were not fatal. Sulu, who could design the MXT mecha, naturally knew this very well. The silver-white MXT mecha's alloy blade left the opponent's neck in an instant. Following the forward momentum, it pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest with a squelch. Like a sharp fruit knife, it easily pierced through a sheet of fiber paper. No one could see it clearly, but when this sharp alloy blade pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest, it vibrated a total of 6 times in a row, completing 2 clear and simple stabbing techniques in an instant. The silver-white MXT brushed past the black mecha and shot towards the other Iron 7 Division mecha in the distance. Throughout the entire process, its speed did not even slow down in the slightest. It was only now that the head of the Iron 7 Division's black mecha finally fell to the ground amidst a beautiful shower of sparks. The SCC all-encompassing surveillance system and the large radius high-sensitivity radar at the neck and chest area had been completely destroyed. The heavy and tall black mecha was like a pitiful blind and deaf person. It stood silently in the middle of the field where the fierce battle had taken place, not knowing where to go at all. Chapter 806. In the forest in the distance, Light yellow leaves were swept away by the autumn wind. The officers in the temporary command post of Iron's 7th Division watched as the silver Mecca swept away the black Mecca in the field like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Gradually, they became solemn and silent. The fact that the silver MXD Mecca was able to avoid the fixed-point attacks of the battleship's main cannons and blazing missiles was already an incredible feat, however. It still suffered such a heavy blow. The staff officers of Iron's 7th Division didn't expect that the battered Mecca that looked like it could explode at any time could actually hold on for so long under the siege of 70% of the entire division. Sulu is very strong, and with the MXD specially made for him by Nutshell, he's even stronger. This mecha doesn't have any long-range weapons system, and its weight is reduced by 12%. With the turbo boost and his control, it's also in an overclock state, and its speed is much faster than a normal MX. Now that we've entered a new battle mode where close combat is king, the difference in speed is basically the difference between life and death. After the battle, inform Nutshell that all the long-range weapons systems of our division's mechas are to be removed. Yes, Commander. Du Shaoqing's voice sounded in the temporary command post of Iron's 7th Division. He looked at the MXD mecha that was whistling through the air like a silver bullet on the screen, and after a moment of silence, he said coldly, such precise, perfect, and simple control. No one on the battlefield can match him except for Colonel Ifong. As an Empire citizen, the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. Pass down my order. All mechas retreat to the east and enter roaming combat mode. Don't let them leave. Until now, the officers of Iron's 7th Division and the temporary command post still didn't believe that the Federation hero in the silver mecha was really an Empire citizen. However, no one dared to disobey the orders of their commander. Du Shaoqing took his sunglasses and stood up. His eyes were as sharp as a goshawk's as he looked at the hologram. He observed every tiny movement of the silver-white MXD in the midst of the fierce battle and gradually understood something. He silently thought to himself, since you've already given up on breaking out of the encirclement and are even prepared to give up your life, then I'll fulfill your wish. All units begin the attack. The soldiers of the Iron 7 Division, who covered the mountains and plains, fell into an extremely complicated and inexplicable mental state, which was extremely rare before the battle began. However, when the battle began, the most elite troops of the Federation quickly dispelled all the distracting thoughts from their minds and entered battle mode. With the order of the temporary command center to launch an all-out attack, the Iron 7th Division instantly blossomed with unstoppable power in the autumn field. Hidden in the hillside, the dense formation in the foundation pit fired fiercely and rhythmically, and all kinds of heavy firepower equipment also played along with it. When the precision-guided rocket flew over the Vol's head, the electromagnetic beam bomb began to shoot at close range. The concentrated firepower seized every opportunity to attack the silver-white MXD that was as agile as a ghost. The heavy weapons equipped in every position coordinated perfectly. What was even more frightening was that the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were operating these weapons could still be so calm in the face of such a terrifying enemy like the MXD. It was as if every one of them had nerves of steel and didn't care about the momentary gains and losses. Even when they gave up on the dense formation at the foot of the mountain, they were still so calm, without any hesitation or regret. The 90-odd black MXD mecha spread out with a roar, roaming around the periphery of the ambush circle. Every time the silver-white MXD mecha tried to burst out with maximum speed, two black mecha would charge forward fearlessly, stopping it at the cost of their own mecha exploding. Under Su Li's control, the silver-white MXD mech's entire body trembled strangely. Its twin engines rumbled dully as it drew a straight and hard-to-capture line after line across the field. It narrowly avoided the attacks of most of the heavy weapons, sending a black mech in front of it flying with a single clash. Finally, it broke through the dense formation at the foot of the mountain. However, the dense formation that had posed the greatest threat to the MXD mecha was already empty. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division had already retreated. What greeted it was a sea of flames that suddenly exploded, and the blue arcs of electricity that shot up into the sky. In order to avenge his father's humiliation, Du Xiaoqing had gathered all his energy and talent to create such a steel-like elite force. Even if the person inside the mecha was called Su Lu, if they still had to pay a heavy price, it would undoubtedly be a great humiliation. This force that had grown up under Du Xiaoqing's strict military discipline and high-intensity training was like a perfectly functioning cold machine. More than 10,000 soldiers in various groups of heavy mecha were like countless components in a machine, important or inconspicuous. They didn't need to think, only to obey. Under the command of Division Commander Du Xiaoqing and the staff, they coordinated seamlessly with terrifying speed, not leaving any loopholes for the enemy to exploit. This was the true strength of the Iron 7th Division that had not lost a single battle in 10 years of military exercises. From the beginning of this battle, the outcome had already been decided. Amidst the smoke-filled fields, the silver-white MXD mech was struck in the waist by a rocket projectile fired at high speed inwards. After enduring multiple impacts, the sturdy outer armor finally could not withstand the final force of the impact and flipped over tragically, revealing the alloy skeleton and fragile structure within. The silver-white MXD crashed to the ground, then stood up. Its right arm kicked up a cloud of dirt, shaking off the electromagnetic beam that had exploded in front of it. However, right after that, the MXD was hit again. With a dull thud, the mecha fell to the ground, then stood up again. Little White Flower was stained with a thick layer of smoke. The originally smooth body of the mecha was protruding in several places. The dark-colored engine oil began to leak from its abdomen. The hydraulic pipe at the left mechanical arm had already been blown apart, and liquid kept dripping into the soft field. It looked like it was bleeding. The remaining quick-burning ammunition from the dense bombardment burned on the lower half of the MXD mecha. However, the mecha didn't stop moving. It continued to move forward with difficulty in the midst of the flying artillery fire. Its left mechanical leg, which had already lost its supporting function, dragged behind, carving a deep mark in the field. The already charred Little White Flower's mecha was like a warrior walking in flames. Its left leg was already lame, but it dragged its heavy and tired body forward. There was no direction, only forward. A high-speed, armor-piercing bullet whizzed over. The heavily damaged Little White Flower's mecha, which had already lost most of its mobility, couldn't make its usual, simple, dodging movements. The twin engines behind its waist roared, and it could only take one step forward with great difficulty. Boom! The already crippled left mechanical leg that was dragging behind was hit hard. With a terrifying cracking sound, it suddenly broke in the middle. The heavy Little White Flower's mecha slowly fell to the side. However, right before it was about to topple, its right mechanical arm suddenly bent down. The badly deformed alloy knife that was no longer sharp stabbed deeply into the soft ground, barely holding up the body of the mecha. Little White Flower's left mechanical arm slowly raised. The Darlin's autocannon at the front began to rotate at high speed, silently pointing at the slowly approaching group of black mechas. In the several square meters of the field with it as the center, there were more than 10 wreckages of black mechas scattered around. The heavy firepower launching base in the forest suddenly stopped roaring. The black mechas that gradually surrounded them also didn't immediately carry out the next step of attack. Perhaps it was out of respect for the MXD mecha and the man in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was because they remembered how they had fought side by side on the battlefield at 5460 Yellow Mountain Ridge, but the entire Iron 7 Division fell silent. The world was silent. Only the low humming sound of the Darlin's autocannon on the broken mecha's left mechanical arm rotating at high speed could be heard. Du Xiaoqing, who had arrived at the foot of the mountain, looked at the broken mecha in the field. It was pathetically half-kneeling, but still refused to give up resisting. The hands that were holding the sunglasses behind his back suddenly tightened. However, his face didn't show any emotion. In a low voice, he said, kill yourself." The simple but extremely oppressive voice was quickly transmitted through the battlefield microphone to the broken mecha 2 kilometers away. However, the person inside didn't respond. The autocannon at the front of the left mechanical arm was still humming and rotating at high speed. Du Xiaoqing looked calmly in that direction. Due to the faint trace of respect in the depths of his heart, Du Xiaoqing didn't ask Su Lu to surrender. Instead, he asked him to choose suicide. In his opinion, no matter who it was, even if he was facing the situation that Su Lu was currently facing, suicide was the best way to escape. The mountains were deathly silent. After who knew how much time had passed, Du Xiaoqing's brow furrowed slightly. He reached out his right hand and took a heavy sniper rifle from the hands of his personal service officer. Then, with a perfect and impeccable gun-holding motion, he took aim at the mecha in the distance. There was only one sniper rifle in the world that could pierce through mechas, and that was the ACW. There were only 2 ACWs produced in the entire Federation. One of them was rumored to have fallen into the hands of some big shot in South Kazhou, which meant that it was in the hands of Lin Banshan. The ACW that Du Xiaoqing held tightly with both hands had originally belonged to Shi Qinghai. It was the one that was shot down at the edge of Charter Square during the Iron 7th Division's handling of the Parliament Hill incident in the spring. This ACW had once bombed Medellin and killed the vice president of the Federation. Today, it might take away a very famous soul. For Su Lu, who was in that broken mecha, if he had to die, then dying under the guns of young Master Shi's companions was probably not a bad choice. But it was obvious that someone didn't think so. A burly figure, with a completely opposite nimble movement, quietly swept through the crowd and pounced on Du Xiaoqing. No one knew how he blended in with the troops of the Iron 7th Division. No one knew how such a burly, strong, and violent body could hide from the eyes of countless soldiers and approach the heavily guarded area like a ghost. At this moment, the elite special guards beside Du Xiaoqing displayed extremely excellent military training and reaction speed, raising the guns in their hands with a clatter. However, at that moment, the burly man was less than 2 meters away from Du Xiaoqing. The cold muzzle of the high-powered Langer pistol in his hand was firmly aimed at the back of Du Xiaoqing's head. "Put the gun down, or I'll shoot you." He had followed the mecha of the Iron 7th Division from the port all the way to this mountainous area. Even as strong as he was, his body felt extremely tired at that moment. However, his wrist holding the gun was still as steady as ever. Under the aim of dozens of machines, his voice was still as arrogant as ever. It was filled with an undeniable ruthlessness. Chapter 807. There weren't many people who dared to threaten the commander of the Iron 7th Division in front of more than 10,000 soldiers, and Madman Lee was undoubtedly one of them. The only son of the Lees of Philadelphia, entered the army at the age of 12, killed countless people on the front lines of the West Woods, and had a violent personality. He dared to rush into Parliament Hill and beat up a senator, so he probably really dared to kill a commander of the Federation. However, Du Xiaoqing's face still didn't show any emotion. He didn't even turn his head to look. He only said in a low voice, "Colonel Li Feng, there's no benefit for you to hastily interfere in this matter, other than making things more complicated and troublesome." After saying this, Du Xiaoqing immediately pulled the trigger under his index finger. Between the complicated mechanical structure at the back of the heavy ACW long-range sniper rifle in his hand, the electronic pulse ignition was completed in an instant. The preloaded composite armor-piercing hard-ink bullet whizzed out of the hollow, strong alloy barrel, accompanied by a muffled sound. It spun terrifyingly at a high speed and shot toward the broken mecha in the distance. "You dare!" Li Feng's eyes widened as he roared furiously. His index finger pressed down again, ready to fire at any time. A few Iron 7th Division special guards bravely stood in between the rifle and the commander, but they were thrown out like stones. "Li Feng, he's from the Empire. If he's from the Empire, then you're a *King woman." Du Xiaoqing smiled, and then ignored what was happening behind him. He was also extremely indifferent to the situation where Li Feng could kill him at any time. His right index finger steadily pulled the trigger again, and the heavy ACW made a dull sound again. In the field in the distance, the broken MXD mecha was trying to stand up again, but two hard ink armor-piercing bullets came at high speed. With terrifying precision and high rotation speed, they directly shredded the outer armor of the right mechanical leg and blasted into the alloy spherical joint. After two dull sounds, the mechanical leg made an extremely unpleasant sound, and the heavy mecha that had just propped up a little fell heavily, sending a cloud of mud flying. After the first dull sound of the ACW, Madman Li sensed Du Shaoqing's intention and forcibly suppressed the urge to pull the trigger. However, right after, he found that Du Shaoqing still had no intention of stopping shooting. What made him even angrier was that the opponent had clearly made adjustments. Then, where's he going to shoot next? The mecha cockpit? Du Shaoqing raised the heavy sniper rifle in his hands and aimed into the distance. His body, wrapped in the dark green military uniform, was incomparably straight, like the white sun in the autumn wind. Seeing this scene, Madman Li's breathing quickened, not because he was nervous, but because the violent emotions in his mind were about to explode. His strong and burly body swelled slightly, and his military uniform tightened. He was ready to attack at any moment, but he didn't dare to make any movements. This was because even he didn't have the confidence to knock down the opponent before Du Shaoqing fired. Whether it was military exercises, the Westwoods, or the battlefield of the Empire, as a lieutenant general, Du Shaoqing had never displayed his military prowess. He only needed to command. Even at this moment, some of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division in the wilderness were seeing their commander shoot for the first time. There was nothing special about Du Shaoqing's tactical action of raising his gun, aiming, and firing. It was just clean and standard, and there was no fault to be found in any of the details. However, it was this strong sense of rhythm and smoothness that made people like Madman Li feel a chill in their hearts. This was not some kind of battle talent, but purely the boring, basic tactical action training that he had done day after day, year after year, ever since he joined the army. It probably took thousands, or even tens of thousands of serious repetitions to deeply engrave this set of actions into his body's instincts. Madman Li looked at Du Shaoqing's back, and his delicate and clear eyebrows furrowed into two swords. Faintly, dangerous sparks could be seen when the sharp edges cut into each other. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Commander Du Shaoqing, Su Lu has shown mercy." More than 10 Iron 7th Division's black MX mecha were overturned in the wilderness. Some were sputtering sparks, while others were lying on the ground like trash. Gradually, the cockpits opened, and the pilots who had escaped death climbed out with the help of their comrades. Although they were covered in blood, they did not look like they were in any life-threatening danger. During the fierce battle, just now, Li Feng had not been able to get close to the temporary command post on the mountain. He could only hide in a dense formation somewhere and watch silently. As one of the 3 strongest pilots of the younger generation in the universe, he had long noticed that Su Li's Little White Flower's performance in battle was a little strange. Of course, Little White Flower's mecha had unleashed all its power, but when choosing a target, MXD would most of the time choose the Iron 7th Division mecha's head, neck, and chest joint, or the inside of the mecha's legs. Destroying important components, such as the SCC, infrared, and balance meter could cause the Iron 7th Division mecha to lose their combat ability, but was not the usual method of directly attacking the vital points in mecha battles. That was why he said that Su Lu had been merciful. Looking at their comrades who were struggling to climb out of the cockpit, some of the Iron 7 Division officers thought of the fact that T Company had only suffered shoulder injuries in the military court. The crowd fell silent. One of the officers actually stood up and looked at Du Shaoqing bravely and respectfully. He said in a trembling voice, "Commander, what do you think? Su Lu is from the Empire." Du Shaoqing's expression was cold, and there was an unquestionable strength in his deep voice. Madman Li looked at him in a daze. He grabbed his hair as if he had nowhere to vent his anger and shouted at him furiously. Don't forget, the number of Empire soldiers who have died at his hands is no less than the number of you and me. Say that he's from the Empire? No one will believe that. I don't believe it, and none of your soldiers here will believe it. No one in the entire Federation will King believe it. Du Shaoqing was silent and did not answer. Madman Li waved his left hand and said angrily, "Can that old bastard Li Jiedu and those fellows in the capital be believed? Only you would be stupid enough to believe them. You're really a King, stupid woman." Hearing the words, old bastard, Du Shaoqing's steel-carved face moved slightly, and an extremely strange and unnatural smile appeared on his face. He replied indifferently, "My mother is indeed a woman, but she's not stupid. Furthermore, she is definitely not from the Empire." At this moment, Li Feng suddenly felt that no matter how crazy he was, there was nothing he could do in front of this famous Iron General of the Federation. It was obvious that he could not communicate with him. Suddenly, he thought of something painful, and his young and ruthless face quickly calmed down. He looked at Du Shaoqing and said slowly, "I understand. You just want to kill Su Lu, no matter who he is. But I must remind you that the Federal Army strictly forbids the killing of prisoners. Even if he is a soldier of the Empire, after he has lost the ability to resist, he still needs to go through a trial before he can be executed. You cannot use torture." The last few words hit the ground like copper beans and bounced up stiffly. Li Feng stared at Du Shaoqing and said coldly, "This time, I won't just watch you bunch of trash kill him like you're killing a tiger." Hearing the word tiger, Du Shaoqing's expression suddenly became very, very distant. It was as if his body was in the middle of this mountain, but the real person was nowhere to be found. The heavy ACW in his hand slowly moved downwards. Pop, 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 pop. In the shortest amount of time possible, the ACW in Du Shaoqing's hand fired fiercely. In the distance, the broken little white flower's mecha's right mechanical leg, which was the only thing supporting it, finally broke after countless attacks. The heavy mecha fell to the ground with a boom. Throwing away the empty ACW, Du Shaoqing took a pair of sunglasses from the orderly beside him. After putting them on, he slowly turned around and looked at Li Feng expressionlessly. "Su Lu is a citizen of the Empire. This is not a crime forged by that old bastard father of yours or by Mr. President. This is the judgment of the Charter Central Computer. My division's military operation this time is not an official operation. It is directly authorized by the Bureau of Proclamation." Hearing these words, Madman Li's expression became extremely strange. As a citizen of the Federation who lived under the charter of the glory of the Charter, he might not normally feel the existence of that glory, but once he had to think about it, he would never doubt that the Federal Central Computer would make a mistake. That's why I don't understand why you want to stop me from killing Su Lu. In my opinion, it's better to let him die than to let him suffer this kind of mental torture after learning the truth. Madman Li slowly lowered the muzzle of his gun. Looking at Du Shaoqing, who was walking away without paying any attention to him, he said loudly, "But in the end, you still didn't shoot." Du Shaoqing's footsteps paused. After a long silence, he replied, "Because I also hope that the Charter Central Computer might have made a mistake this time, although the possibility is basically zero." A thunderous roar rang out in the eastern skies. More than 10 Federation close-range fighter K-12s roared over at high speed, flying towards that battered MXD mecha in the middle of the mountain. The people on the ground could even clearly see as many as 9 Oxdale air-to-ground missiles under the wings of the fighters. It was very clear that the purpose of these fighters was to blast that MXD mecha, which no longer had any mobility, into pieces of unbreakable metal. Madman Li, who had already walked not too far in front of Little White Flower's mecha, abruptly raised his head. Seeing the fighters roaring towards him at high speed from the east, he thought to himself, "I wonder which troop is this clown who has come to take advantage of the situation to lick his father's chrysanthemum." Anger rose in his anger and disdain, and he roared, "Scram!" This scram, full of anger and terrifying power, was really like a thunderclap exploding in the sky above the mountain, even suppressing the roar of those fighter jets. The pilots on the fighter jets had already discovered that Federation officer through their high-sensitivity surveillance equipment. Then, through contact with Iron 7th Division's ground forces, they learned of this person's identity. In the shortest amount of time, they released the button to launch the missiles, pulled up in a hurry, and flew towards the southwest. They really did come with a murderous aura, and then they flew away resentfully with their heads down. Perhaps it was an illusion, but the black mechas of Iron 7th Division around the mountain slowly retracted their thick and heavy gun barrels aimed at the sky. The heavily damaged cockpit door was forcefully pried open by a specially assigned engineering mecha. Li Feng climbed onto the platform with a heavy expression and carried out the fellow who was already extremely tired and heavily injured to the point that he couldn't even move a finger. Hundreds of guns and more than a dozen black MX mechas were aimed at them. They looked extremely nervous, as if they could open fire at any moment. In the eyes of the soldiers of Iron 7th Division, although the immobile Su Lu was admirable, it was also terrifying. Li Feng took the specially made military handcuffs from the soldiers beside him and tightly clasped his and Su Li's wrists. Looking at the electrically controlled explosive shackles that the soldiers handed over, he was silent for a moment. Then he cursed under his breath and also handcuffed Su Lu. During this process, the pale-faced Su Lu didn't say anything. He just silently watched Madman Li's movements. Occasionally, he would raise his arm with difficulty and wipe away the blood that kept flowing out of his nose. "Don't play dead." Li Feng frowned and said, "If you really want to die, hurry up and say your last words, and can at least get some of your inheritance." Sula looked at him tiredly and said, "I'm so hungry." Chapter 808. On a cold autumn day in the mountains, there was still smoke from the battle. This was the battlefield chosen by the charter computer for the Iron 7th Division. It was desolate and uninhabited. The fierce battle had a relatively good ending at the end. Other than the forest that had been cut by shrapnel and the soil that had been blown up by the bombardment, Su Lu was probably the only one who was satisfied with the outcome. However, at the moment, he was too injured and weak to make any changes. The continuous days of battle had left countless wounds on his body, both inside and outside. These wounds were forcibly suppressed by the will of medicine and the Jinshi in his body. Today, they finally erupted in full force in the battle against the terrifying Iron 7th Division. The moment he sensed the explosive shackles on his feet, the moment he felt the exhaustion and pain from the deepest part of his soul, along with the mental relaxation brought by the complete surrender, quickly transmitted from the damaged parts of his muscles and joints to every nerve and finally to his brain. In an instant, his face became even paler. Li Feng looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Su Lu, in order to save you, I broke all the military discipline that I could, and even pointed at the head of a lieutenant general. If you dare to die now, guess what I will do to you?" You know what? Back in the training base, I once argued with Du Shaoqing about whether one person could change the outcome of a war. Su Lu looked at the black muzzle that had been aimed at him and smiled with difficulty. Today, I wanted to prove to him that I was right, but I didn't expect to lose so completely. But it was a good fight. "I find that you're very similar to Du Shaoqing," Li Feng said. Su Lu frowned in doubt and said, "I don't like Du Shaoqing's character. He always has a sullen face like I owe him a lot of money. Other than copying his sunglasses, I really can't think of anything similar to him." In the armored vehicle, the officer of the Iron 7th Division in charge of the escort heard Su Li's words and thought of his own division commander. His expression was very interesting, but then he immediately returned to being absolutely serious and indifferent. "I'm saying that you're as girly as that Iceman, Du Shaoqing." Li Feng roared at him angrily. "You're still in the mood to be cocky at a time like this." After a moment of silence, Su Lu said in a slightly hoarse voice, "No matter how boring the excuses of those big shots are, I have killed so many people without being tried by the court these days. No matter how it is tried, it will only be a death sentence. Those people deserve to die." Li Feng glared at the officer of the Iron 7th Division, who was enraged by his words, and said coldly, Anyone who kills a tiger must die. In the end, it's just death. Why do you have to do this? Sulu shook his head tiredly. From the capital to Harbor City, I've been watching you kill people. Good job. You know I don't really like you, but you are avenging the tiger. I can't just watch you die. Li Feng said coldly. Death is nothing, but I think you definitely don't want to be wrongly accused of being a citizen of the Empire. That makes sense. Sulu slowly narrowed his eyes and said with difficulty, I'm a citizen of the Federation when I'm alive, and a ghost of the Federation when I'm dead, as long as I'm not a hungry ghost. Li Feng cursed in a low voice and shoved the pasty nutrition bar that he had just opened into his dry mouth. Then he looked at him and asked with a frown, Sulu, have you ever thought that you might really be a citizen of the Empire? Don't talk nonsense. Sulu answered vaguely. If I were a citizen of the Empire, my mother, who has never left Onglin, not even Nashi, would definitely be the first to disagree. She would think, who the F***CK is going to reimburse me for a one-night stand? Li Feng felt that it was very reasonable and laughed out loud. While laughing, he pressed his fingers on the special handcuffs on their wrists. With a muffled groan, he pressed hard. A burst of energy burst out in the carriage, and a delicate mechanical spring of the special alloy handcuffs was deformed by this huge force and could not be opened anymore. The officers of the Iron 7th Division in the carriage looked at this scene in shock. One of the officers subconsciously looked to the front and saw that the key to the special alloy handcuffs was in the hands of the commander in front. However, from the looks of it, the key was probably no longer used. Looking at Su Li's puzzled eyes, Li Feng casually explained, This way, no one should dare to try to kill you secretly. Hearing this explanation, Su Li's cold chest suddenly felt a little warmer. He wanted to shrug, but found that he could not even do such a simple action with his current physical condition. He could only smile and look at the young colonel who was like a small mountain. He thought to himself, this is really a proud and childish guy. The long stretch of troops drove towards the capital special district. More than 10 black mechas silently followed beside a military vehicle. They strictly carried out the direct orders of Division Commander Shaoqing. If the person in the vehicle tried to escape, or if Colonel Li Feng tried to help that person escape, they had the authority to directly blow the military vehicle into pieces, including Li Feng. Although there was the guidance of the federal military parameters and the ship was equipped with protective plates according to the other party's request, the smuggling merchant ship still suffered serious damage after passing through the giant warp hole. Therefore, when the negotiators of the Federation government finally agreed to the underground resistance group's visit to the capital ring under Mu Un's emotional and even annoying request, they had already switched to the federal military warship. Until now, Mu Un still did not understand why the other party suddenly agreed to his request and just remained silent on the matter of meeting with Colonel Sulu. Naturally, he did not know that this was the intention of President Pabre. After going through so many things, the president was very willing to cordially receive the resistance group's soldiers from the Empire and wanted the entire Federation to see the image of him shaking hands with the foreigners. Huai Chaoshi did not care about these trivial matters. Still playing the role of Mu Un's sidekick, she did not even show a trace of vigilance about the possibility of being betrayed by Mu Un to the Federation. She only calmly watched the unfamiliar scene of the galaxy outside the porthole of the warship. It should be known that if Mu Un told the accompanying Federation soldiers that the thin young man with short hair and a hat was the princess of the Empire whose name shook the universe and whose hands were stained with the blood of the Federation soldiers, the Federation government would definitely be very willing to pay all the price and give Mu Un unimaginable returns. Huai Chaoshi had entered the star sector of the Federation before, but this was the first time she had entered the capital ring of the other party. She narrowed her eyes, and a strong desire occasionally appeared in her calm eyes. She cherished all the time she had and compared the scene of the galaxy in front of her with the star map that the Intelligence Department had paid a huge price to obtain from Bermuda. Arriving at the Cylon region through the Gary Corridor, she had lived in the Sunset region for a period of time. During the long space journey, She had also passed through several important space checkpoints of the Federation. The Princess of the Empire silently and carefully observed every detail, such as the diet of the ordinary people, the number of transportation tools, and their mental state. From that, she had determined the current economic situation of the Federation, the supply of social necessities, and the supply of ordinary energy. The more she looked, the more silent she became. She discovered a shocking fact from many details. The gap between the economic strength and the military potential of the Empire and the Federation was even greater than the intelligence department had estimated. As for the difference in the level of technology, one only needed to see that the Federation's warships could freely pass through the Gary Corridor and the black ocean-like solar blocks on the Old Moon base outside the window to easily come to a conclusion that made all the people of the Empire feel cold. That blue planet is S1. According to my father back then, this is the planet he saw in a universe that most resembles the human's ancestral planet that the ancestor of the Hua family once described. The middle-aged man, who had spent most of the long journey reading novels in the cabin, came to Huai Caoshi's side without anyone noticing. A wide-brimmed hat that was very much in the style of the northern region of the Empire covered his overly handsome face. I know what kind of true emotions are hidden under your silence right now. Master Fan Wei smiled and said, "Perhaps my father saw the huge gap between the two sides back then. So he tried his best to stop the previous emperor from starting the West Woods expedition and try to use the seed plan to promote peace in this universe. Unfortunately, he failed in the end, and the seed plan completely changed in the hands of your father, Huai Fuchai. It was unknown what kind of complicated emotions the Federation's war godly Pifu, who is now sleeping behind Mount Feiqing, would have if he heard the words of Master Fan." Huai Caoshi silently looked at the blue planet in front of the warship and tightly pursed her lips. "But you don't have to worry too much. The Empire always has two advantages that the Federation can't approve. The first is population. In the end, any war is just a competition of reproduction speed. There is no difference between a war between humans and a war between monkeys." Master Fan probably had a way to ensure that his voice wouldn't be heard by the surveillance equipment on the warship. He leisurely said, "The second is the concentration of power. The Empire only has one voice, but the Federation has countless voices. The more desperate the war between the two sides is, the greater the impact of this difference will have. Of course, as a lover of literature, peace, and Schiller's novels, I'm very unwilling to see this war reach this stage." Huai Caoshi finally broke the silence and said with a slightly cold gaze, "I'm not worried about these things. I'm only worried about that guy who thinks he's a messenger of justice and was turned into a stupid rock by the Federation. Will he still risk his life for these foreigners? If he were to die so pointlessly, this adventure of mine would seem rather ludicrous. Praise the Creator. Fortunately, nothing really happened between the two of you back in the manor. Otherwise, if the plot in Master Schiller's 8-parts trilogy had been fulfilled, I would have sinned greatly." The great teacher gently closed his palms and looked at the blue planet that was getting closer and closer. His eyes were intoxicated by the huge white snow cloud that spanned countless kilometers in the north of the planet. He praised, "Father, your description is right. It really is a big cotton candy." Chapter 809. Dang, 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 dang. Strong piano accents came from the television. As the piano song progressed, the sonorous melody became more and more solemn. It was as if black clouds had covered the sky of the city, and snowflakes were about to be painted the color of lead by the smoke. An extremely deep sense of crisis arose spontaneously. In this oppressive atmosphere, a low and solemn voiceover with a strong sense of compassion sounded. "This is the last few years of the 36th constitutional calendar. The cruel imperial family has once again launched the extremely inhumane plan of forcibly crossing the space channel. The fierce space turbulence and the torsional data monitoring that they could not control made crossing the space channel an almost suicidal action. Usually, only 1 out of 100 spaceships could successfully cross the space channel, and the rest would all become tragic victims. However, this time, the cruelty of the imperial family was inflicted on themselves. Those spaceships that risked their lives to enter the space channel were all their own descendants. Finally, a spaceship was lucky enough to pass through the Gary corridor. Like a thief, it avoided the glory of the charter and quietly escaped into the Bermuda Triangle Star region. This spaceship was mainly responsible for the mission of transporting a baby. When this baby was imported into the Federation by the Bermuda Human Trafficking Organization, his luck became the beginning of the misfortune of countless Federation families. The kind Federation man who adopted the baby was surnamed Mai. He gave the baby the name Macklin. This documentary, produced by the Federal Military's Venus Documentary Studio, was called Seed of the Empire. It was directed by the famous director Bai Zimiang. Today, it officially began broadcasting on the Federation's news channel. Along with a worrisome voiceover description, the television screen showed a scene of the innocent baby playing in a private house in the Federation, including the beginning when the Imperial spaceship forcibly broke through the space channel. These scenes were all done by the director's imagination. However, this did not affect the effect of the documentary. With just the beginning, it successfully captured the attention of all the Federation citizens. After years of silence, the government of the Federation began to decrypt the Empire's seed plan and told the people of the Federation about the Macklin incident. Although there were vague rumors about it in society, most ordinary people were still shocked speechless by the story described in the documentary. The old, white-haired senator who had been almost forgotten by many people was no longer a kind-hearted pacifist who had devoted his life to the reconciliation of the Federation, but an evil executor of the terrible scheme of the Imperium. According to the description of the documentary, with the joint efforts of the former president, President Pabre, the Bureau of Proclamation, and the glorious Federal Army, the Federation government wisely saw through Medellin's sinister intentions before he attempted to bring the important data of the space passage back to the Empire. They killed him in the building of the Four States Peace Foundation, which was surrounded by mountains and mountains. At the same time, because there were still many seeds of the Imperium lurking inside the Federation, in order to avoid alarming them and the evil Imperium, the government carried out a strict intelligence blockade and did not inform the people of the Federation of this information. Until recently, when the Federation confirmed that the purge was completely successful, the operation was officially decrypted. In this documentary, of course, there were no images or words mentioning the death of the seed of the Imperium, Colonel Su Lu and another man named Shi Qinghai. On the terrace of the back mountain of Macho facing the lake, one could clearly see the reflection on the surface of the lake. On the opposite hillside, layers of green and yellow trees formed a beautiful picture that did not seem to belong to the human world. Secretary Shun stood behind the high-back chair and said softly, "Mr. Li Yuan Gong just called." He did not understand why the government chose this time to publicize this matter and wanted to ask what you think. That old man who likes to wear funny round hats is not an uncultured burlesque actor. It seems that pretending to be an old fool has become a habit. Lady Tai put the delicate silver spoon into the Guna porcelain plate, looked at the lake and mountains, and said calmly, "The government needs to create momentum. They need an explosive news to attract the attention of the people and make them forget about the ancient clock ship incident. As for the Parliament Hill and the continuous assassinations, they need to be completely forgotten." Of course, with Pabre's real personality hidden in his body, now that he has been re-elected, he must be very willing to tear off Macklin's last coat and kick that dead man to the ground and then step on him. No matter how you look at it, Macklin is the most troublesome opponent he has ever encountered since he started his political career. The documentary did not mention Colonel Su Lu. If he is really the seed of the Imperium, Shinli asked with an extremely humble attitude. Since you want to manipulate the people's psychology, why not throw Su Lu out as a target? It takes a process for the ordinary people to accept things. Otherwise, it is easy to have doubts or even reactions. Once they completely accept the fact that Macklin is from the Imperium, it will be much easier for them to accept it when they find out that the hero of the Federation is also from the Imperium. Pabre, or other people who can influence or control the public opinion, are actually doing the same thing. Feeding the people with delicious and non-dangerous information, just like the farm owner in Bermuda, cleverly and coldly controlling the amount of food he feeds. He wants to let the chickens eat enough to avoid making a fuss, but at the same time, he can't let them die of overeating. Of course, the most important thing is that he can't let those chickens find out that their fate is to be eaten by others. Lady Ty sneered slightly, put down the coffee cup in her hand, and said, "In my opinion, George Carlin has never really understood these problems. If the amount of information is too complicated, the ordinary people will not have the ability to distinguish what they need at all. They can only eat passively until they are fed, until they become idiots in the end." Shunli stood silently behind his wife, recalling the similar arguments that had appeared in books before. He just felt that it was a bit strange for these words to come out of his wife's mouth. After a moment of silence, he said, "Now it seems that all the problems are focused on one point, whether Colonel Sulu is the seed of the Imperium or not." Lady Tai did not answer this question. She silently looked at the lake under the mountain in late autumn. The autumn feeling in the yellow forest in the lake reminded her of many things from many years ago. She said lightly, "What did old Tai say?" Old Director Tai said on the phone that he enjoyed his retirement life very much. He was very happy playing golf every day. He did not give his opinion on the Sulu matter, but in the end, he said, "An era is over." Shunli paused, looked at his wife's back, and said in a low voice, "Let him be. He is the only distant relative of the Tai family. It is good for him to rest more when he is old." But back then, he was always unwilling to have more sons, and instead adopted a bunch of daughters. I really don't know what he was thinking. Lady Tai certainly knew why the former director of the Bureau of Proclamation was unwilling to adopt a son from young to old. But she, who had always been grateful, did not want to point it out. As for the end of an era that old Director Tai mentioned, of course, he was not referring to Sulu. That era referred to the past of the Federation formed by the former president who truly cherished the Federation but eventually died of illness in office. The god of war Li Pifu, Lady Tai, and her husband, the former director, and perhaps the man who was wandering among the stars. Following the strong rise of Pabre's government, the death of Zhong Su, and the impending death of Sulu, a brand new era, one that no one could see the future clearly, and one that no one knew whether it was a good or bad era, had opened its curtains. Madame Tai stood up and left the balcony. Her back view still looked young, but it was unknown whether in this new era, she and the rulers of the big families still had the qualifications to stand behind the stage and enjoy the performances under the spotlight or just coldly watch from the sidelines. In the late autumn, a closed-door secret hearing was being held on Parliament Hill. Other than the hundreds of members of the management committee, even their closest subordinates were forced to leave. This secret hearing had nothing to do with the documentary, and had nothing to do with Macklin, who had already been thrown into the abyss. It was only related to a colonel of the Federation named Sulu. Parliament Hill had just started, but it was already in an extremely intense debate, or rather quarrel. A few male members of the parliament directly launched vicious personal attacks on the National Security Advisor, who had just finished reading the government report on the stage. Colonel Sulu is a hero established by the Federation government, and a trusted aide strongly protected by your president. At this time, you actually want us to believe that he is actually a citizen of the Empire? Do you think that we are crazy, or are you crazy yourself? The people don't know who killed Macklin, but you don't know? Have you forgotten who killed the Butcher County King of the Empire? Mr. National Security Advisor, I really want to know if your shiny head is filled with artificial egg white. Sitting at the highest point of the stage, Mr. Zion, the vice chairman, was clearly unable to control the situation that was currently out of control, and it seemed that he had no intention of controlling the situation. The old chairman stroked the white hair on his forehead, thinking about the situation that had taken a turn for the worse in recent days. He knew that his hopes of Sulu blowing up the storm and becoming the vice president, or even the president of the Federation, had been completely shattered. Thinking that his days were numbered, it was already difficult for him not to show disappointment on his face. How could he have the mood to care about anything else? The members who were angrily criticizing the government, the president, and mocking the national security advisor did not admire Colonel Sulu, and were even incomparably disgusted or fearful. Today, there were several empty seats on Parliament Hill, reminding the people from time to time that the owners of these seats had died under the guns of Sulu and his companions. However, as Li Feng said to Du Shaoqing, no one in the Federation believed that Sulu was a citizen of the Empire, and neither did the members of the Parliament. The shocking demonstration not long ago had directly caused Pabre's government to become more powerful. Parliament Hill, which had been forced to remain silent for too long, did not hesitate to seize the government's extremely stupid mistake and launch a counterattack. Pay attention to your demeanor. At the same time, improve your logical judgment. At this moment, the situation represented that the government and a considerable number of members of the parliament were about to shed all pretense of cordiality. The National Security Advisor no longer cared about anything and slammed the seat in front of him with a livid face, reprimanding loudly, "Why can't a hero of the Federation be a spy of the Empire? Macklin was a member of the Federation elected by the people, so he is a citizen of the Empire." The noise on Parliament Hill gradually weakened. Some of the members began to seriously consider a certain possibility, regretting that they had reacted too quickly and acted too exaggeratedly. Chapter 810. Councillor Evo was the daughter of a miner from the Eastwood district. She had no background and was known for her isolation in Parliament Hill. Last year, during the hearing on the Federation's arrest of Sulu, it was she who first questioned Councillor Paulson, who had died in the hospital building. Colonel Sulu is the same as President Pabre. He is the pride of the Eastwood district. Now you're saying that the boy from Eastwood is from the Empire. I cannot accept it emotionally. Councillor Evo looked at the National Security Advisor in front of her and said, "I want evidence. I want impeccable evidence. Otherwise, I will fight you to the end." The National Security Advisor looked at her and answered after a moment of silence. He knew that this female counselor was a staunch supporter of the president in Parliament, so he answered with a very polite tone. "The Bureau of Proclamation is arranging for the second confirmation of the evidence. If the counselors are willing, the government welcomes you to supervise the whole process. What the president means is that since we want to accuse a hero of the Federation, the relevant evidence must be believed by everyone, including Sulu himself." One day in late autumn, countless dark-colored cars drove slowly into the Bureau of Proclamation along the straight dead-end road in the suburbs. These cars included councillors from Parliament Hill, civilian representatives who had signed temporary confidentiality agreements, senior reporters from various authoritative and serious media outlets, as well as senior officials from the government and many important generals from the military. President Pabre was there in person, and the 7 families had sent their most trustworthy representatives. The Bureau of Proclamation had the highest level of security among all the organizations in the Federation. It was even higher than the president's official residence. It was usually heavily guarded, and today the atmosphere was even more oppressive and tense. Most of the leading figures of the Federation were gathered here. If the Empire had the ability to cause a big explosion at this time, it was not an exaggeration to say that the Federation would definitely be in chaos. This was a very old-fashioned way of describing it, but it was very suitable for today's situation. Chief Editor Bob and reporter Wood stood below the Bureau of Proclamation building, looking at the box-like building that was too regular in shape. As members of the news industry, this was the first time they had the opportunity to enter the mysterious Bureau of Proclamation. They should have been excited to record everything they saw, but at this moment, their emotions were extremely complicated and heavy. After most of the people were invited into the building of the Constitutional Bureau, several bulletproof military vehicles drove over at high speed. Under the protection of several armed military police officers, Zhou Yu and Shang Xiu jumped out of the military vehicles with handcuffs on. From the outside, The two women didn't suffer much from the government's secret investigation. After all, one of them was the daughter of the former Minister of Defense, and she had been invited by that lady again in recent months to have tea together. The other was one of the best genius engineers in the Federation, the chief technical director of the giant corporation Nutshell Mobility. No matter which investigation department it was, they had to be polite to them. The government specifically asked them to come and watch the comparison of biological markers, which vaguely revealed some kind of message. It seemed that the president or General Lee Jae-do hoped that they would wake up after seeing the real face of Su Lu and not fall deeper and deeper into the wrong path. This was a very old-fashioned way of saying, but it was very appropriate to describe the government's attitude toward the two women who were still very valuable. Su Lu was a war hero of the Federation and an idol in the hearts of the people. Suddenly, he was accused of being a spy of the Empire. For such a major incident, there must be enough strong evidence. Therefore, President Pabre did not hesitate to agree to the second comparison of biological markers. He intended to use this incident as an opportunity to quickly stabilize the unstable political situation due to the recent series of incidents. He intended to integrate the power of the Federation and let the word unity enter the hearts of the people again. The last vehicles to arrive at the Bureau of Proclamation were a dark green military vehicle and a black vehicle without any markings. The vehicles stopped under the stone steps. General Lee Jae-do walked out of the military vehicle and looked at the black vehicle in front of him calmly and gently. The door of the black vehicle slowly opened. A pale and thin young man walked out, holding a small metal box tightly in his hands. The white-haired butler Jean looked at him worriedly and said, "Young master, why don't I take it?" Tai Yuan shook his head and carried the small metal box to the Bureau of Proclamation. The box was not heavy, but he held it very tightly with his hands, wearing anti-slip white gloves. This was because there was a bottle of blood in the box that he had personally gone to the military prison of Qingsheng and drawn from that guy. This bottle of blood could not determine whether Su Lu lived or died, but it could affect the political situation of the entire Federation. However, for Tai Yuan, the importance of this bottle of blood was that it could prove something that was more important than life and death in the eyes of some people. The internal protection of the metal box was extremely sophisticated and advanced. Even if it fell from dozens of meters to the ground, the things inside would not be damaged. However, this box was too important to Su Lu. It involved too many things. He only trusted Tai Yuan, and Tai Yuan only trusted that it would not be replaced by someone else. Until now, although no one believed that the Federal Central Computer could be wrong, people like Macho in the Back Mountain, who had used the internal staff of the Bureau of Proclamation more than once, still believed that the last biological marker comparison was most likely done by the Bureau of Proclamation under the orders of the government. For the opposite reason, Lee Jae-do personally went to the military prison of Qingsheng and supervised the entire process of Tai Yuan drawing Su Lee's blood. As for Macklin's biological marker, it had always been stored in the core backup of the Federal Central Computer. Macho and the Iron Mathematician had also secretly stored a copy after the Macklin case broke out. No one could fake it. The people walked into the Bureau of Proclamation building. After a long time, the people walked out of the Bureau of Proclamation building. At this moment, a cold autumn rain fell without warning. The people of high status had their own escorts holding up umbrellas. In an instant, black flowers bloomed in the square in front of the building, covering the people's faces. The true emotions on their faces could not be seen clearly. The wide and straight road leading from the Bureau of Proclamation to the outside world was once again occupied by all kinds of dark-colored vehicles. Most of the vehicles were black. The cold autumn rain pitter-pattered on the vehicles, and the tires rolled up a thick layer of mist as they whizzed away. It was as if they had just attended a sad funeral. When the funeral was over, the people left in a hurry, not wanting to be tainted with any bad luck. Tai Yuan, who was the last to arrive, was still the last to walk out of the Bureau of Proclamation building. His thin and pale cheeks were stained with an unhealthy red. The two hands that were not carrying the small metal box waved irritably. He refused the umbrella that Butler Jean extended over his head and walked down the stone steps. He walked into the rain, letting the cold autumn rain soak his body from top to bottom. In addition to the important people in the Bureau of Proclamation building, in the distant end of the vast universe, on the Mo planet at the center of the battlefield, some people almost simultaneously knew the result. According to President Pabre's personal order, the Bureau of Proclamation specially set up a multi-encrypted information channel to synchronize the image of the biological marker comparison to the Mo planet. In a certain office in the Federation base, all the high-ranking officers of the new 17th Division, including Commander Chung Hai and all the members of the first 7 teams, collectively watched this scene. The Federation government had no choice but to do this. After the battle between the Iron 7th Division and the Little White Flower MXD in the wilderness, their accusation that Su Lu was a spy for the Empire spread uncontrollably within the army, even to the front lines of the Empire. The soldiers respected heroes like Su Lu, who did not fear death the most. Even the Iron 7th Division could not bear to do it in the end, let alone the other soldiers. Of course, under the strict discipline of the Federation Army, the morale of the various troops was shaken, but it was not too big of a problem. Only the reaction of the new 17th Division was particularly strong. From Commander Hele to Hua Xiaoxi, from Lin Ai to the ordinary soldiers, not to mention people like Xiong Linquan and Gu Shifeng, they firmly believed that this was the most shameless and dark persecution of the Federation government. They even began to pick up their guns, preparing to forcibly board the warship and kill their way back to the capital ring to save people. In such a terrifying situation, the Federation government had to use ironclad evidence to intimidate these fearless soldiers at the first possible moment. The room full of people was deathly silent. Only the sound of countless rapid breathing could be heard. In order to see the snowflakes caused by the long-distance signal transmission, Commander Hele's eyes were already a little bloodshot. However, in the end, they only turned into despair. He breathed heavily, tore open the collar of his military uniform, and wanted to pick up the cup to drink water, only to find that the water in the cup had long been emptied. Commander Yu Qinghai had always maintained his silence regarding the incomparably intense reaction of the soldiers in the past few days, to the point of preparing to kill their way back to the capital ring. As a veteran of the generation of military godly Pifu, he always insisted that what the army needed were not ice-cold killing machines, but great men full of hot-blooded vitality and injustice. Moreover, he was the same as his subordinates. He believed that the accusation of spying for the Empire was definitely another disgusting plot by the Federation politicians. But the truth was not so. All right, everything is over. Return to your respective combat positions and prepare to fight against the Empire's people. Of course, you have to mentally prepare yourself for the military trial. Commander, you said in a low voice. The wrinkles on his face seemed to have deepened a bit. Don't be a sissy. Xiong Linquan stood up with a gloomy expression. He stared at Gu Shifeng, who was tugging at her hair in frustration, and roared, "In any case, I don't believe it." He looked at his comrades in the room and waved his arms angrily. Boss has led us to fight so many battles. When has he not charged at the very front? Who has he killed less Empire people than? He is our boss. Your instructor. How can someone like him be from the King Empire? Xiong Linquan angrily slammed the door and walked out. A moment later, a howl of venting came from outside the door, followed by the sound of countless bullets tearing through the sky. This is the 6th chapter. The monthly votes are now at 8807, not 8897. I wrote it first. I'm more handsome than you guys. 72 has exploded. The situation is critical. I won't write a single chapter now. Yes, I'm still writing the 7th chapter. Who cares? Since it's already like this, I'll just eat a meal and wait for the 9,379 last day. Monthly votes. Monthly votes. Monthly votes. Chapter 811. This incident that was destined to shake the entire Federation was forcefully determined in the direction of development in the Bureau of Proclamation. The pale and skinny prince walked in the cold rain with an indifferent expression. No one knew that an equally pale and skinny guy was sent to a military psychiatric hospital in the Southern Hemisphere because of another incident that was destined to shake the entire universe, but was forcibly buried in data fragments. His pale eyes were bloodshot, and his eye sockets were deeply sunken. At this moment, Biderman looked like a street trash who had overdosed on drugs. Because of the hysterical experience in the Bureau of Proclamation, he had a lot of suspicious little actions. For example, his lips would tremble at a high speed from time to time, and he would often open his 10 skinny fingers and move them from top to bottom in front of him, mimicking a waterfall falling down. "I'm not crazy." Biderman curled up in the chair weakly. Looking at the doctor in front of him, his eyes were full of pride and sadness. The charter computer came back to life. I saw it with my own eyes, but then I saw with my own eyes she was killed. From the beginning to the end, this genius with a terrifying sense of the mechanical language insisted on calling the intelligent old thing her. Now, when he talked about the death of the great mechanical wisdom, he couldn't help but show a sorrowful expression on his face. The doctor listened calmly with a smile and simply took down the medical record. After walking out of the ward, the doctor whispered a few words to the strong male nurse. Then he smiled at the young lieutenant colonel in front of him and said, "This is a military hospital. Since you've handed him over to me, you can rest assured." The officer said seriously, "The person inside has made a great contribution to the Federation, but he knows too many things. You must take good care of him." "Understood. I'll let him enjoy his old age here." The doctor smiled and replied, "I'll inform you immediately if there are any problems." The officer raised his right hand and saluted. He thanked the doctor for his hard work and left the psychiatric hospital that was far away from the bustling world and filled with the smell of drugs that even he wanted to escape. The doctor looked at the back of the officer and smiled gently. Then he looked into the ward through the observation window on the door. On the other side of the thin glass, Biderman, who was put on a restraining gown by the strong male nurse, was screaming in horror. "I know. There's chlorpromazine in the syringe. Don't give me that. I don't want it. I beg you, don't give me this. I don't want to become an idiot." Because of fear, Biderman's weak body struggled on the bed. He looked like a pitiful fish that had been thrown into the desert. He begged, "I know I was wrong. I'm not mentally ill. I don't know anything. That guy has never been alive. Please let me go." The doctor looked at this scene through the glass. He watched as the sharp needle slowly pierced into the man's pale skin. Hearing the shrill screams coming from behind the door, the smile on his face became even gentler. In the deepest part of Chingcheng military prison, the special forces directly under Small Eye's units surrounded and monitored the cell with the strictest security measures. They were always on guard against the two people inside breaking out of the prison. Although the Chingcheng military prison was filled with the most heinous and bloody criminals of the Federation, and the security measures should be flawless, every time they thought of the rumors about the two people in the prison cell, everyone, from the warden to the elites of the Federation who had been trained in the Philadelphia Training Center, could hardly control the nervousness in their hearts. Yes, there were two terrifying people in the same cell. After Su Lu was seriously injured and arrested by the Iron 7th Division, Madman Li directly crushed the precision lock of the special alloy handcuffs with his strong finger strength. The two people's bodies were always connected by the handcuffs. Without the key, it was naturally impossible to open them, and he would not allow anyone to try to open them. They ate, received treatment, bathed, went to the toilet, and slept. They were together all the time. Madman Li stayed by Su Li's side every second. His vigilant and ruthless eyes scanned the surroundings because he believed that the Federation government, who dared to design such a shameless plot, would definitely do everything possible to secretly kill Su Lu. Madman Li had the bad temper of a standard soldier. He absolutely could not tolerate such a thing happening, and he could not let the only sister-in-law in the world who truly loved him become a widow before she was married. During these days in Chingcheng prison, Madman Li stayed by Su Li's side. He stayed in this dark cell like he was guarding the position of the army, not giving an inch of ground. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its own cubs, but in the end, it was eaten. Uncle Jean was killed by them, just like that. I want to see if that old bastard will kill his only son. Li Feng sat on the bed with a cigarette in his mouth. He stared coldly at the Special Forces soldiers with serious expressions outside the cell. He thought of his father who had just left the prison, and his voice was extremely cold. The anger and frustration hidden in the young colonel's terrifyingly burly body was clearly captured by Su Lu. He knew very well why. Madman Li, who had left home at a young age and spent his entire adolescence in the front line of the West Woods, had always regarded the tiger as his closest elder and even a father figure. However, the mastermind behind the explosion of the ancient bell, the real murderer who killed Commander Zhong, was his biological father. What could he do? Yuan, that bastard, he actually took so much of my blood just now. He didn't even think about the fact that I haven't recovered from my injuries yet. I could have been killed by him directly. Su Lu, who was holding a cigarette, smiled and changed the topic. However, when he thought of Tai Yuan's dignified expression, his fingers trembled slightly, and the ashes of the cigarette fell on the bed sheet. At this moment, in the Bureau of Proclamation building of the Capital Special Administrative Region, the second biological marker comparison was being carried out. Su Lun never thought that he was a citizen of the Empire, but he couldn't help but feel nervous. As Madman Li once said, death was not terrible, but being wrongly accused of being a citizen of the Empire was unacceptable. Once accepted, it was equivalent to surrendering to the conspiracy of the government. Because of Li Feng, his second stay in the Qingqing military prison was not too difficult. Although the crime this time was more horrible than assassinating a member of the parliament, he was satisfied with all kinds of living conditions, whether it was a hot bath or a cigarette. After all, since the prison couldn't get rid of Li Feng, of course, they wouldn't dare to treat the only son of Chairman Li unfairly. After taking a deep puff of the cigarette, Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the late autumn sky outside the window. He was wearing a warm, cotton thermal jacket. Because of the handcuffs, he couldn't put his left hand into the sleeve and could only drape it. Perhaps it was because of this reason that he felt a little cold. Noticing Su Li's strangeness, Li Feng's delicate eyebrows slightly raised. There was a trace of mockery on his face as he said, "Are you afraid of death? You should know that during the war period, those who assassinate the president are traitors. You deserve to die. The president and your father killed Commander Zhong, but it could arouse the anger of the people of the Federation. They could use this opportunity to start an all-out war against the Empire. So they're not traitors? If I could really kill the president last time, I could actually push the blame to the people of the Empire." With the cigarette in his mouth, Su Lu said vaguely, "Didn't they say that I'm from the Empire? According to their logic, President Pabre should have sacrificed himself. The assassination of the President of the Federation by the people of the Empire is much more fierce than the Ancient Bell incident. The people and the troops will be aroused, and the Federation will definitely win the biggest victory on the battlefield." Just when Li Feng was about to praise Su Lu for slapping the face of the Federation government, the phone in his pocket rang. He picked it up immediately and didn't avoid Su Lu. After hanging up the phone, Li Feng turned his head and looked at Su Lu with a very complicated expression. After a very long silence, he said with a slightly hoarse voice, "The result is out." Su Lu narrowed his eyes. "You really don't know that you are from the Empire?" Li Feng withdrew his gaze and looked at the cigarette between his lips with white smoke and silence. He was very focused. Su Lu suddenly opened his eyes. On his seemingly calm face, the pair of thick black eyebrows that were as straight as knives dangerously raised. His pupils that were usually full of sincerity and trustworthiness constricted in a very short time and then slowly relaxed. He didn't answer because he couldn't. The dark cell fell into a deathly silence. The long and boring time that seemed to be about to freeze moved slowly in the silence until Li Feng's slightly cold voice sounded again. "It was in this prison that Grandpa met you for the first time. You should remember that I promised him in front of you that if one day you dare to betray the Federation, I will definitely kill you with my own hands." Su Lu still didn't answer. His feet retracted back onto the bed, and his back leaned against the wall. He looked indifferently at the black bloodstains left behind by a dead fly in the summer on the snow-white wall. It was unknown what he was thinking about. "Sulu, I've never liked you. You might be a good person, but you're definitely not a good soldier. You often mess around, but I have to admit that I never thought that you would betray the Federation. So I never understood why Grandpa would say those words so seriously back then." Mad Manly took a deep drag of the cigarette and licked his lips with the tip of his tongue. After a short pause, he continued, "Now I have a general understanding. Perhaps Grandpa knew about this before anyone else." Sulu still leaned against the wall. His eyes didn't close, and his thick eyebrows that were like knives gradually relaxed. He just looked across in silence and didn't say anything. "I believe that you don't know that you are a citizen of the Empire. Of course, you have never betrayed the Federation. But since the blood of the Empire's royal family flows in your body, this in itself is a type of betrayal." Madman Lee threw the cigarette, but that had already lost its flavor to the ground. He turned his head to look at the indifferent face that was extremely close to him and said, "I won't kill you with my own hands because you are a good person. No, there are no good people in the Empire. Fine, even if you are a citizen of the Empire, you are definitely not a spy for the Empire. This reason should be enough." Hearing these words that were clearly somewhat illogical and ridiculous, Sulu turned his head to look at him. The corners of his lips moved, and he laughed in an extremely ugly manner. "Let's go." He laughed as if he was crying. Chapter 8:12. Hearing the words, "Let's go," Mad Manly was silent for a long time before he nodded. The two of them sat side by side on the bed with their backs against the wall of the cell. They casually raised their handcuffed hands, Su Li's left hand and Li Feng's right hand, and exerted force in opposite directions at the same time. The special alloy handcuffs that had handcuffed the two of them for many days had long been broken. Even if there was a key, it couldn't be opened. However, under the seemingly casual tugging of the two young men on the bed, the handcuffs began to creak and gradually deform. A crisp sound of metal breaking echoed in the quiet cell. The thick alloy handcuffs specially made for Su Lu were torn apart by the two men just like that. Only a round handcuff was left. It kept rotating on the two men's wrists, gradually digesting the terrifying force they had just endured. The cold light of the broken handcuffs flashed from time to time. Several elite Special Forces soldiers of the Federation who had been guarding outside the cell saw this scene and were so shocked that their bodies stiffened. Their pupils constricted, and they fell into a state of confusion for a long time. It wasn't until Li Feng walked to the door with a livid face that they reacted and opened the door more cautiously than before. Looking at Li Feng's burly and strong back that gradually disappeared into the depths of the corridor, and looking at Su Lu, who was in a daze as he looked at the fly's corpse and black blood on the wall again. These elite Special Forces soldiers who had received close combat training in Philadelphia's body training hall still found it hard to believe that there was actually someone in this world who could break apart such hard alloy handcuffs. And they only used the strength of one hand. Was this a human or a machine? Until now, the elite Special Forces soldiers completely agreed with the rumors in the army. Su Lu and Madman Li were, without a doubt, the two most powerful men in the Federation. However, their situation now was completely different. Li Feng could leave this prison at any time, but Su Lu could only sit silently in the cell and wait for the arrival of death. Su Lu leaned against the wall and sat on the bed. He slightly tilted his head and stared at the white wall in a daze. With his eyesight, he could even clearly see the tiny wings on the dried corpse of the fly between the black, congealed blood stains. It seemed that this disgusting and pitiful fellow was still futilely trying to escape when he was beaten to death by the previous owner of this cell in the summer. Why flee? As a fly, your fate is either to die in a cesspool or to die on the way to find cesspool. What's the point of escaping from one cesspool to another? Sulu closed his eyes tiredly. Hearing the hurried footsteps outside the door, he guessed that it must be the Chingchong military prison who came to give him some measures. He understood that Madman Li had chosen to directly break the alloy handcuffs because he wanted to silently tell the prison that such a method would not be able to restrain his strong and powerful hands. Regarding this, Su Lu did not have any resentment or disappointment in his heart. On the contrary, he felt that it was natural. Since he had confirmed that he was a citizen of the Empire, Madman Li would certainly not give him the chance to escape. If it were him in the past, he would certainly have made the same decision. The heavy and hard alloy door of the cell silently slid open. Several prison staff members walked in with nervous expressions. First, they crouched down and increased the suction force of the heavy magnetic shackles on Su Li's feet to the maximum. Then, they fastened 3 sets of reinforced handcuffs on his wrists. There was a metal bracelet on his left wrist and a broken handcuff. Now, there were 3 more sets of handcuffs. They were densely stacked together. Occasionally, there would be a crisp sound of metal clashing. It looked as beautiful as those thin bracelets on the wheat-colored delicate forearms of the S3 Flowing Fire Festival. If it was last time in the Qingqing military prison, Su Lu would definitely laugh. But now, he did not want to laugh. Even his posture did not change. He completely ignored these people. Only when the prison doctor tried to inject him with some kind of drug did he turn his head to look at the other party. He did not stop the doctor from injecting. He just looked. After an unknown amount of time, Su, who was like a stone sculpture, finally woke up from the inexplicable state caused by the violent psychological impact. His gaze was still indifferent and emotionless. His thick eyebrows, which were sometimes like unsheathed straight knives and sometimes like laughing willow branches, were still indifferent and lazy. His posture was still the same, but his brain had finally recovered some ability to think. People of the Empire. He was a person of the Empire. When did he know that there were not only people from the East Woods, West Woods, Upper Woods, there were also people of the Empire? Like wringing a wet towel, Su Lu racked his brain, trying hard to recall many memories of his childhood. He even frowned, but still could not remember anything more. He only vaguely remembered that when he was young, his father used to read the newspaper at the dining table, lamenting about the cruelty of the people of the Empire. And when his father used the people of the Empire to scare little Xian Yi, his mother would fly into a rage, and his father would immediately apologize with a smile. Now, he actually rarely recalled his childhood life because it was too long ago. When the terrible shallow mine disaster that caused half of the mining area to collapse happened, he was still very young, so he did not have many clear memories. Because he went to the slag heap with Victor and the others to play mecha battle games, he was extremely lucky to survive. However, his father, who worked in the underground mine, died. His mother and little Xian Yi, who were at home on the surface, also died. Victor's family was also dead. Xiao Chang's father was also dead. Donglin had a bunch of orphans. Other than that, nothing had changed. The children, who cried until their throats were hoarse, could only watch helplessly as the engineering mecha lifted the heavy, quick-setting cement blocks in vain. The scene was extremely sad and chaotic. Sulu could not even find the bodies of his parents. He only held the body of his sister, Xian Yi. He still remembered how cold that small and cute body was. Yes, little Xian Yi's small grave was still on the hillside outside of the East Woods. He felt very ashamed that he had not gone back to see it for so long. This was also the reason why he did not want to recall his childhood. What about the people of the Empire? Su Li's thick eyebrows were more and more furrowed. He stared at the wall, but did not know where to look. He remembered that the first time he saw what the people of the Empire looked like was on the TV news. It seemed to be a documentary, talking about the only official visit of the Empire in history. The voiceover of the male commentator of the Federation was full of a sense of superiority that looked down on the inferior races. Every 3 minutes, he would mock the Empire people in the diplomatic mission, as if they would never smile. As for Sulu, he only remembered that the people of the Empire on the TV were not like what his father said. They were not covered with scary long hair from head to toe, including their faces. So he thought of his dead family and secretly ran to the abandoned mine to cry. Where's the first time he saw a living person of the Empire? It should be on the West Woods border planet called 5460. At that time, he took Jian Shui'er and fled under the pursuit of the Empire's Wolf Fong Mecha Brigade. The first time he met the people of the Empire was a life and death battle. As for the dead people of the Empire, he had seen too many of them. The sun outside the window slowly sank into the distant horizon, and the light became much dimmer. Qingqing military prison was not as cold as the capital at this time, but Sulu, who was sitting on the bed leaning against the wall, seemed to be frozen, allowing the twilight to appear and disappear on his face. The darkness of night covered the earth, but he did not move at all, only remaining silent. Silence, silence. He did not become perverted in silence. He was only indifferently recalling and thinking about many things. Many things that he could not understand in the past gradually became a clear function curve in his mind. Although he did not know what the variables at the beginning of this function curve were, some segments of the curve were gradually beginning to reveal the answer. For example, why in the entire Federation, other than the people of Old Li's family, he was the only one who could learn the special abilities of the Empire's royal family. For example, why that man who wandered among the stars actually stayed in Donglin for so many years and appeared so coincidentally by his side. It should be known that in the real world, there was never a fortuitous encounter like in novels. There must be an internal reason for small probability events. The descendants of the rich were rich, and the legendary were legendary. The story of starting from scratch, the story of a foolish boy meeting a wise master, could only be a story in the end. Then, was it also a conspiracy that he enter the uncle's repair shop? No, he did not want to connect the coincidental encounter between the young man and the escaped criminal with these words. Don't think about it anymore. Sula felt very tired. He didn't want to fall asleep, but he could not because this unbearable change was like countless ants crawling in his body. They silently and contemptuously bit and tore at his fresh flesh, spitting extremely corrosive acid. Once the acid splashed, it sizzled. The painful, sore, itchy, and burning sensation converged into a straight line. The line of fire gathered into a ball in his chest and began to burn fiercely. This ball of fire was really unbearable, and he was extremely angry for no reason. Sula finally moved. He stood up from the bed and tightly pursed his thin lips. He lifted the heavy prison bed with one hand and slammed it against the snow-white wall in front of him. It was as if he wanted to smash the extremely small ball of black blood and the already withered corpse of the fly into pieces again. With a loud bang, the bed frame broke into pieces and dust flew everywhere. The stern reprimand of the Special Forces soldier came from outside the door, but he acted as if he didn't hear or feel anything. With a heavy punch, he directly smashed the only small square table in the cell into pieces. Boom, 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 boom. Countless violent sounds rang out in the cell, and debris flew everywhere. For the first time in his life, Sulu vented his emotions so wantonly. He almost crazily smashed everything in front of him that he could see. In the end, even a terrifying hole appeared in the hard alloy door. At this moment, his peripheral vision fell on the window. Through the tempered glass that was so thick that it distorted his vision, he saw the twinkling stars in the late autumn night sky. He did not know why it touched the eternally strong but fragile nerves in his heart for the first time today. Looking at the bright starry sky above his head, he calmed down and slowly walked to the window. There was a crushed pack of cigarettes and a lighter on the ground. They were probably left behind by Madman Li before she left. Sula picked one up, lit it, and stuffed it into his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the night sky outside the window. He said softly, F***CK your mother. Chapter 813. Ever since the 37 constitutions, there had always been an ugly person from the Imperium in the hearts of every citizen of the Federation. In their eyes, the cruel enemies of Zhuo Tianxing were uncivilized, bloodthirsty barbarians, inferior races struggling in the closed and outdated social system. just like Xiong Lin Chuan's true emotions when he roared furiously on Mo Hua planet. In his eyes, it was impossible for the Mother * King Empire citizens to have a character worthy of praise. Li Feng, who had been fighting the Empire soldiers in the West Woods since he was 12 years old, instinctively believed that there were no good people in the Empire. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the starry sky outside the window. Thinking of his bizarre background, he couldn't help but laugh self-deprecatingly. In the past few years, he had fought for the Federation and the Empire, but it turned out that the people he had killed were all his own people. It turned out that he was actually an inferior race in the eyes of the Federation citizens. Cloaked in glory and guarded his own rights, he had been silently and stubbornly walking the path he thought was right. However, before the white clouds in the sky could turn into dogs and the mulberry fields on the ground could be swallowed by the ocean, the hero of the Federation suddenly became a prisoner, a poisonous seed buried deep in the Federation by the Empire. This kind of strong contrast was not easily accepted by anyone. Su Lu, who had the thickest nerves in the universe, could only stop himself from going crazy and force himself to calm down with the help of the night sky outside the window. That day on the phone, President Pabre had asked him if he felt that the whole world had let him down. At this moment, he really did feel that way. An abandoned child of the Empire stood alone in the prison cell of the Federation, as if the entire universe was slowly leaving him. A thick and deep feeling of loneliness enveloped his entire body. He stood quietly by the window like this for an entire night until the two moons dispersed, the stars fell, and the white willow trees appeared on the horizon. Schiller once famously said, "The coming day will be longer than the last year." The original meaning of this sentence was that the unexperienced future was more beautiful and valuable than everything in the past added together. But to Su Lu at this moment, these words meant that even if he only had one day left to live, he could only spend it in anger, pain, struggle, and frustration, and it would definitely be extremely long. The newborn red sun struggled to jump out of the horizon and shone on the window of the prison from the side. Su Lu was awakened by the sudden strong light, and subconsciously he narrowed his eyes. For some reason, he suddenly remembered that in the few years after he escaped from the East 4 sector, his truly happy and peaceful days were actually in a shabby courtyard in the slums of the Left Heaven Space Zone. Were the people of the Empire really born bad people? In fact, he had never thought about it this way. Aunt Susan and Paul were good people, and the Imperial officer under Glacier 5460 was also a good person. So what if he was from the Empire? The key is what kind of person you are. The fleeting thought was like a ray of light, instantly flashing in his mind and then disappearing, making Su Li's somewhat muddle-headed mind calm down a lot. After a long period of silence, he picked up a piece of sharp metal shard from the ground. Facing the glass, he grabbed a strand of long hair and slowly and seriously cut it off. Following the cutting of the shard, his black hair slowly fell to the ground beside his feet. The somewhat deformed face on the glass window was still so familiar, but the cut short hairstyle that was almost flat cut was particularly messy, like burning weeds. The prison door slid open silently, and the pale and thin Tai Zon walked in. He kicked the bed leg that was smashed by Su Lu. He moved his feet with some difficulty and walked behind Su Lu, looking at the messy scene around him. After a moment of silence, he sat directly on the ground and carefully put down the metal box in his hand. Su Lu turned his head to look at Tai Ziyuan and calmly greeted him. "You're here." "Yes, I'm here." Tai Ziyuan raised his head to look at his messy short hair, frowned, and gave a simple reply. In reality, both of them knew that Tai Ziyuan still came to visit Su Lu in prison after confirming that he was a seed of the Empire. They didn't know what kind of psychological struggle he had experienced last night. "Sit." Tai Ziyuan sat on the ground and greeted him. Then he laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Since His Highness Prince Delin of the Empire is your uncle, then you are very likely to be the real crown prince of the Empire. Maybe it really is the bloodline at work. No wonder you never respected me, the fake crown prince, since you met me. Don't talk nonsense." Su Lu kicked away the trash on the ground and sat down directly. He said, "I've never believed in these disgusting bloodline theories. Even if I'm just a dung picker, there's no reason for me to respect you in the way you want me to respect you." He followed up with another sentence. "Other than being better than me in bed, how can you compare to me?" Today, Tai Ziyuan didn't argue with him. He looked at him with a complicated expression and said, "You are really surprising. I thought I would see a martial arts maniac with bloodshot eyes today, but in the end, the one who appeared in front of me is actually the original you. I don't know whether I should praise your pure nature and thick nerves or laugh at you for being an ignorant and fearless stinky rock. After only one night, you've accepted the fact that you're a citizen of the Imperium." Tai Ziyuan laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "I spent an entire night and still couldn't understand this matter. You watched the biological comparison, so I trust you. Although the charter computer is just a cold machine, I don't think it will make a mistake. So no matter how you think about it, you can't get rid of your identity as a citizen of the Empire. So other than accepting it, what else can you do?" "That makes sense." Tai Ziyuan was silent for a moment. He took the metal box and opened it. He lowered his head and said seriously, "I will remember the friendship between you and me. In the future, I will tell my descendants that my best friend is a citizen of the Empire." "I remember that you were supposed to get married this autumn," Sulu asked. Tai Ziyuan smiled and replied, "It was postponed." Sulu was silent. Tai Ziyuan pushed the metal box in front of Sulu and said, "Plain porridge with scallion pancakes. After eating, you can go on your way in peace and die in peace." Sulu was very clear-headed and calm. No one in the entire Federation would help him, not even his best friend. This had nothing to do with betrayal, and even less with cowardice. It was only related to the endless racial hatred between the Federation and the Empire that had lasted for hundreds of years. His last friend was sending him on his last journey to meet up with his best friend underground. This wasn't too painful of a matter, so after Sulu took the plain porridge and scallion pancakes, he simply said okay. Like a whale sucking in water, he finished the plain porridge in the box. After eating 3 scallion pancakes, the slightly full Sulu suddenly looked at Tai Ziyuan and said, "These last few days I don't want to eat in the prison cell. Can you help arrange for them to let me eat in the cafeteria?" Tai Ziyuan vaguely caught some information from his words. He suddenly raised his head and stared into his eyes. Sulu didn't evade. He calmly and stubbornly looked back at him. There was only a strong desire to live and the most complete sincerity toward his friend. Chapter 814. 24 hours, 9 chapters, 27,000 words. It had never happened before. It would probably be very difficult in the future. Behind the madness was a pack of Honkdashin, 6 cans of Red Bull, 4 bottles of mineral water, a bowl of jajang noodles, and a box lunch. Old Chow said that every word was laborious. Oh, he meant that every word was filled with blood. I was not so miserable. He was the ocean, and I was a drop of water. I just wanted to say that these 27,000 words were written seriously, and my attitude was guaranteed. In the end, I did not feel tired or bitter. Because of my narcissism, I was abnormally excited and broke my own limits until my eyelids were as heavy as my weight. Although I wrote a lot, I encountered the most tragic plot of the spy. It was not a climax that could pull votes. Even I was depressed, sad, and depressed when I wrote, let alone you who were reading the story. It's the time to welcome the new year. Many people are playing and drinking. I'm chatting with you on the keyboard. I'm not complaining because it's not bitter at all. After getting high, writing really becomes the best entertainment. It's still that mushy but sincere sentence. Who asked it to be my hobby to serve you? In 2010, I bought a house, learned to drive, bought a car, practiced driving, got a marriage certificate, held a wedding ceremony, went on a honeymoon, and even went to Inner Mongolia to attend Zhang Xiaohua's wedding ceremony. I always hoped that the vast number of wise readers would pity and understand cats. When I had the time and energy to write, I would never not write. Well, I could not write, then I really could not write. Those who could understand, long live. Those who could not understand, long live 9,000 years, cough, cough. To be honest, I came to an unfamiliar place alone, without any connections or experience, to complete the series of things that shrunk the essence and pain of life, really consumed too much of my energy. At the end of the year, I finally finished everything and began to find the world and feeling back. In December, I encountered another week of illness and decadence. But my heart was here, and I did not care. I only needed to work hard and write seriously. In the end, 8 consecutive days of 3 chapters and 1 day of 4 chapters was the most enjoyable and longest process I had ever done since I started writing in 2003. As for today's 9 chapters, it was something that I had never even thought about. It was very refreshing to wash away the busy and gloomy air of this year. It was very refreshing to really challenge my own limits. It was very refreshing to use this method to welcome the new year with you. We were halfway through our journey, and we fought our way from 8th place to 2nd place. Although we were currently in 3rd place, the scene of our chrysanthemum being destroyed was a rare sight for me. Today, other than being crazy, what I was most proud of was that I suddenly realized that I had learned how to use hooks instinctively when writing books. There will always be a place where I can use the pen for clarity in the future. I'm very happy about this. When I write slowly, the quality is not necessarily good. When I edit 3 chapters a day, the quality is the best. Today, I wrote so much and my head is so muddled, so the quality is naturally not as stable as when I was writing 3 chapters. Please bear with me. I'm going to sleep now. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to welcome the new year in my dreams. As for the final ranking of the monthly votes, it's all up to you. I've already done my best. As for what would happen next year, he would explain in detail tomorrow. The line was still 180,000. I'm really starting to feel sorry for the money you've spent. Of course, I'm not talking about subscriptions. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year, including the 72 people who sent text messages cursing my computer to crash. In the end, there was a beginning and an end. From 2010 until the very last moment, he shouted, "Monthly votes." Chapter 815. There is a phrase in the former dynasty that was used to describe people who were full of unyielding spirit and were willing to cross the boundaries of the camp, or even the entire world for their friends. That phrase was the machete man who dared to pay homage to a traitor. This was a very ordinary description, but if you carefully tasted it, you would definitely be able to figure out a strong and silent sense of masculinity. There were many people who dared to be a traitor, but very few people dared to pay homage to a traitor when the overall situation was already decided. This often meant that one needed to stand on the opposite side of morality. Morality was the collective will of social creatures, and it seemed to be so strong and invincible since ancient times, because to defeat it was to defeat one's own heart. Sulu was a traitor, but his current identity was even more unacceptable to the Federation than a traitor. He was not dead yet, but he was going to die soon. Taizuan came to see him for the last time in prison, which could also be regarded as paying homage to him. The crown prince of the former dynasty had prepared a pot of plain porridge in advance to be the machete man who paid homage to himself. To have such a friend in one's life, Su Lu felt that this drama of life was already worth the price of admission. As the saying goes, a handshake in the midst of thousands of people will make my sleeves fragrant for 10 years. A bowl of porridge will be cold to the world. How warm will my chest and abdomen be? Before Taizuan left, he said that he would try, perhaps just to comfort himself. Before the cold death came, there was still some warm hope, but Sulu did not care too much. Whether it was comfort or not, it was obvious that the crown prince was trying to make Su Li's last days more comfortable. At the beginning of the morning, the military prison efficiently cleaned up the cell that he had smashed into a garbage dump. They arranged a new bed and a small table, and even hung a soft light screen. Sulu did not watch TV, but he could guess what the recent news of the Federation was. Watching scandals and shocking revelations was a very good way to pass the time. But if he was the focus of attention in the news, and the evil camp at that, then this method would become uncomfortable. He rubbed his slightly swollen eyebrows and laid down on the bed. pulling the snow-white blanket over his head. From before the catastrophe to after the catastrophe, from the Federation to the Empire, from the naughty children to the elderly who were about to die, the warm and dark bed had always been the last safe territory that human beings trusted the most. After people were injured or heartbroken, they would crawl into their own bed and block the light from the outside world. This last territory could be easily unified. People could greet His Majesty's pregnant mother under the quilt without worrying about the sharp ears of the intelligence officers. They could do many things that were not allowed by law, and they did not have to worry about the light of the charter breaking through the privacy regulations. In the darkness, Su Li's fingers quietly stretched to the side of the wall. Last night, the crazy smashing to vent his frustration had caused many cracks to appear on the seemingly solid prison walls. He remembered very clearly that there was a standard distribution box in one of the cracks in the cement. His fingers touched a slightly hard feeling. He closed his eyes and pressed hard with his fingertips. The hard material of the distribution box slowly and silently cracked under the magical power spurting out from his fingertips, revealing the complicated wiring troughs inside. As an excellent mechanic, Su Li did not even need to look at it. He only needed to stop his finger for a moment to accurately distinguish whether it was a data cable or an energy cable. He also knew what material the cable was made of. There was no way he would get it wrong. His fingertips moved slightly, and the not-so-sharp fingertips easily cut open the outer layer of the data cable. The hard rubber on the cable slowly and silently cracked open like a fatty who had his stomach cut open, exposing the chromium alloy core wire. The rubber curled up and separated on both sides, really like the hard but extremely thin skin of a fish. In the dark world, he closed his eyes and very precisely controlled the burning power that was generated behind his waist. It slowly passed through his shoulders and upper arms, penetrated his fingertips, and entered the exposed data cable. Using the bioelectricity in the human nerves, or the jinshi that was similar to pulse waves to communicate with the machine, and even enter the other's processing structure to control the operation of the machine, sounded so ridiculous and lacking in possibility, and there was no reason at all. All the science fiction novels in the Federation had never imagined a story with a similar theme, because the science fiction writers had never come into contact with or even heard of the ability in Su Li's body. Last year, when the Nutshell Engineering Department was conducting experiments in the West Woods Sunset State, Su Li had tried many times with the help of Zhou, but he had not made any effective progress. As for the level of being able to directly control the M52 military mecha with just a few charming fingers like Uncle back then, and making the black mecha feel like dying in the hills, it was even more unattainable. It was the same today, but also not the same. Some things had vaguely changed. The high-speed flow of complex numbers in the data cable entered his mind between his fingers, triggering a strange reaction. It did not form a clear image in his conscious mind, only a very strange and vague feeling. He could not pinpoint the specific reason, but he seemed to be able to see on the other end of the chaos. In addition to the central control, the data cable in the wall was also connected to the electronic safety valves of each cell. After an unknown amount of time, he turned over and lay flat on the bed, in a daze under the blanket. He did not know if the very vague feeling in his mind was an illusion caused by his collapse under the heavy pressure, or if his consciousness had really followed the data cable and felt the feedback of information in the distance. Humans were the first order of machines. Did this mean that the bioelectricity in the human body, or that strange power, could really become a language that machines could recognize? In a hot spring pool in Philadelphia, Li Pifu had once mentioned something about the Yada Jinshi to him. When the old man was in his prime, he had volunteered to be a test subject for the Federal Academy of Science. Even so, the Academy of Science did not have a precise result, and there was no way to spread it to the entire Federation. However, the Academy of Science had basically confirmed that this kind of training method should be to extract some kind of residual power from the human body that had been passed down since ancient times until it was activated into a specific kind of power. After thinking for a moment, Su Li still could not figure it out, so he thought about it again. He silently held the data cable again and continuously poured the burning power generated by the back of his waist into it. The more he walked, the more he did not cherish it. If the data cable was a highway bridge used by the prison to control each cell and facility, then what he was doing now was using this highway bridge to test the reaction of the prison. At this time, Sulu was not clear about his control of the power in his body. He had obtained a rare opportunity to improve. It was like the transition of electrons in a crystal, or there was no qualitative difference in the rotation pattern, but once it was activated, the time required for the release process could be sharply reduced. Being calm in the face of a major event was a realm that very few people could reach. The pressure and crisis of a tense time could often cause creatures to instinctively break through their own limits. There were great terrors between life and death, but there were also great opportunities. In the past, when Sulu encountered major events, or even life and death, he could be calm as usual because he believed that as long as he lived a great life, even if he died a glorious death, there would be no regrets. The so-called terrors were just normal. However, the difference between today and the past was too big. The death he was about to face had nothing to do with glory, and the life he had once lived had nothing to do with greatness. It was just a sad joke, so he had a strong desire to live. However, since it was already confirmed that he was a person of the Empire, he would definitely be immediately sentenced to death. The Federation did not have any mercy, tolerance, or sympathy for the people of the Empire. There was not much time left. Covered and hidden in the darkness of his own territory, Sulu lay there for several hours. Then, he heard the alloy door of the prison cell slowly slide open. The Major General Warden's cold voice rang out. Fortunately, he was not immediately executed. Instead, he announced a temporary change in the prison's measures. He was allowed to go to the cafeteria to eat his last few meals. Shock, shock, and still shock. Within half an hour of the news report from the Federation News Channel appearing on the screens of millions of households, the millions of citizens of the Federation only had this one emotion from the brain to the body. Their thinking ability was shocked to the point of numbness. Their bodies were shocked to the point of being somewhat stiff. In the school cafeteria with lunch boxes in hand, on the sofa with teacups in hand, and in the bar with hard liquor, people opened their mouths and eyes wide, not daring to believe what they heard and saw. The hero of the Federation, Colonel Sulu, was actually the most well-hidden spy of the Empire, just as Lady Tai had analyzed in Macho's back mountain. Although it was still difficult for the citizens of the Federation to accept the truth with Senator Macklin as the scapegoat, the majority of the people believed in this fact in an extremely short amount of time. After all, the results of the two biological marker comparisons were right in front of everyone's eyes. Many people deeply trusted by the people, including Chief Editor Bob, supervised the whole process, and the glory of the charter would never be wrong. The emotional reaction of the Federation citizens was somewhat strange. After the shock, they felt fear, the fear of the decades-long conspiracy of the people of the Empire. When they knew that the beast of the Empire was lurking around them like ordinary people, this fear was hard to suppress. Then, the fear directly turned into disappointment, anger, and extreme embarrassment. Naturally, people projected these emotions onto the spies of the Empire. Macklin was dead, and all the spies of the Empire had been wiped out. Then, the only person left to bear these negative emotions was Sulu. Even the people who had heard some rumors about the Golden Foundation building back then would not think about it now. Macklin was killed by Sulu. They used to enjoy this rumor to add to the legendary glory of their heroes and idols. But now, they subconsciously forgot about it. The relationship between heroes, or idols, and the fanatical citizens was actually very similar to the relationship between the romantic men and the resentful women in the romantic novels. Once they realized that the person they loved had lied to them, and the idol turned out to be made of cheap mud, then the deeper the love back then, the deeper the hatred now. The greater the hope back then, the greater the disappointment now, and the more ashamed they felt. Countless young male students went to the food stalls outside the school resentfully and drank until they were drunk. Then, they angrily smashed all the wine glasses and cursed the shamelessness and despicable of Su Lu from the Empire. Thinking of how they stupidly put on black masks a few months ago and marched on the street with their classmates to denounce the Federation government for Su Lu, they felt extremely ashamed and cursed even louder. Countless young women sulked at home for no reason, criticized their mother's food, and sarcastically mocked the poor taste of the female military stars on TV. When they gathered with their friends, they raised their orchid fingers and mocked that they had long known that Colonel Su Lu was not a good person. His small eyes looked so shifty that they had completely forgotten that the word they used to describe his small eyes was charming. They also forgot that the encrypted electronic diary in the drawer had written down their teenage fantasies and the name of a certain hero. When the hero landed on the ground, other than turning the blurry face into a clear and ugly one, it only stirred up a cloud of dust. Other than that, it did not cause any other movement. After the shocking appraisal in the Bureau of Proclamation building, the Federation government directly released Zhou Yu and Shang Xiao. As for what kind of deep-seated reasons were hidden behind the scenes, or what kind of attitude Mr. President wanted to express to the various forces through this release, it would definitely cause many people to speculate and analyze, but the people involved were not interested in it at all. Shang Xiao directly returned to the Harbor City Industrial Park from the capital. She refused the proposal of the CEO of Nutshell to take a vacation and ignored the rumors in the engineering department that she might be deprived of her independent technical director by the board of directors. She directly threw herself into the heavy work. Her subordinates and the staff of the engineering department all knew the reason for her recent disappearance. No one would talk about the news related to Su Lu in front of her. They could only watch her work day and night and obviously lose weight. One day, the director of Nutshell's engineering department, Mr. Jose, finally could not stand it anymore and comforted her. Sometimes it's a good idea to lose yourself in work, but you have to take care of your health. I just can't find anything else to do except work. This has nothing to do with losing myself in work, because I don't intend to forget anything. Su Lu is from the Empire. You have to learn to forget. Shang Xiao inserted the pen lead into her black hair, took off her glasses, and calmly said to Mr. Jose, "I'm an engineer. Whether it's a mecha or a washing machine, in my eyes, it's a combination of a pile of metal components and microchips. Similarly, whether it's from the Empire or the Federation, in my eyes, it's a combination of a pile of muscles, bones, skin, hair, and body fluids. There's no difference." In the manner, 10 slightly trembling fingers ran through her black hair. Nan Xiangmei withdrew her gaze from the TV screen, and her beautiful face was filled with sadness. He's from the Empire? How can he be from the Empire? As the current matriarch of the Nan family, Chao Jiren, of course, knew this shocking news much earlier than the ordinary people. She knew that her daughter, who had long been deeply in love with Su Lu, would definitely fall into the most difficult period of her life after knowing the truth. She had been sitting on the sofa with her daughter. At this time, looking at her daughter's sad and helpless expression, Chao Jiren sighed faintly in her heart. When it came to love, one would often have to go through all kinds of hardships. For example, she and that wretched fatty had ended their relationship because of the invisible pressure from her family. She believed that her daughter was more determined and braver than herself back then. Whether it was the pressure of family or society, whether it was the division of wealth or power, nothing would shake her daughter's seemingly weak but actually strong will. Even if Su Lu was a hooligan on the streets, as long as her daughter liked him, she would definitely persevere until the end. However, what stood in the way of this relationship was not Jianshi, Zhou Yu, or even Su Lu, who was about to die, but something that no one in this universe could resist. In the bedroom on the second floor, Zhong Huiyin, who had just finished washing her hair, sat on the princess bed with her arms crossed. Her slightly wet black hair had long past her shoulders and hung down on her white nightgown. She stared at the TV screen with her eyes and mouth wide open. After a while, she suddenly frowned cutely and softly muttered a few very indecent vulgarities. She jumped off the bed, picked up the electronic screen, and began to seriously and silently sketch something. The non-flickering blue lines on the electronic screen gradually became denser and clearer. In the end, a map of Nan Xiangmei's manor was presented. Although the electronic map was not completely drawn, it was very precise. Probably no one would have thought that the 12-year-old little princess of a Zhong family could draw such a precise electronic map based on the impressions left by Nan Xiangmei when she took her to the manor for a horse ride. It even marked several loopholes in the manor surveillance system. The sound of the door opening was heard. Zhong Huiyin hid the electronic map behind the bed as fast as she could. Her small hands quickly rubbed her face, changing the tense and serious expression that was completely incompatible with her age into a little girl's sweet and innocent smile. Nan Xiangmei walked in and directly sat on the soft couch by the window. She stared blankly at the stars above the treetops outside the window. After a long silence, she said softly, "Do you know about that matter?" "Yes." Zhong Huiyin made a sound from the depths of her cute nose. Nan Xiangmei slowly lowered her head and hugged her knees as if she was afraid of cold. She said sadly, "I feel very useless. I can't do anything to help him. And when I found out that he was from an empire, my first reaction was to forget all the days of the past few years. I don't want to think about him anymore. I don't want to think about whether he can survive. As long as I don't think about him, I can pretend that I have never liked an empire person that much." Sparkling and translucent tears fell from her eyes. Nan Xiangmei said guiltily and sorrowfully, "The first reaction is the truest reaction. That is to say, I don't love him as much as I thought. I'm very ashamed." "Oh, don't think too much." Zhong Huiyin walked over and comforted her. "For the people of the capital ring, the Empire people and the Federation people are not the same race at all. They're a group of beasts. Therefore, if you fall in love with an Empire person, it is equivalent to having sex." Nan Xiangmei did not understand. She raised her head and looked at the little girl's face blankly. Sex is strictly forbidden even on the 18 forbidden forums. It is the most disgusting thing to do, just like those weird uncles who like girls like me. Zhong Huiyin patted her chest with a smile and said, "Of course, a natural good girl like you can't stand such a fierce thing." What a disgusting description. Nan Xiangmei recalled the scene in her mind. There was no blush on her face, only uncontrollable fear. She looked at Zhong Huiyin with a natural and relaxed expression and said with a trace of confusion and unwillingness, "You just said the capital ring. Don't you people of the West woods look at the Empire people like that?" "Of course not." Zhong Huiyin waved her thin white arms and said, "We often see Empire people there. There are many prisoners of war and so on. Although I know that those Empire people are bad, but..." She shrugged and her black hair fluttered slightly. "In our eyes, they're actually as bad as the people of the capital ring." It was a very simple sentence, but it made Nan Xiangmei frown very much. She vaguely grasped some key issues. Zhong Huiyin noticed the change in Nan Xiangmei's mood. She coughed twice to interrupt Nan Xiangmei's thoughts and said with great sincerity and concern, "You don't have to feel guilty. Think about how many of our compatriots have the Empire people killed? How many sisters have they raped? How can you fall in love with an Empire person? Sister Nan Xiangmei, forget these things. Su Lu is not the only man in the world." In the dead of night, Nan Xiangmei, who had experienced a strong mental shock, finally fell asleep. There was still a trace of tears in the corner of her eyes. Zhong Huiyin, on the other hand, opened her bright eyes and looked at the ceiling in a daze. Her heart was full of uncontrollable joy. "You are actually from the Empire? That's good. Those women in the Federation who are infatuated with you will probably all run away. I will be the only one who dares to follow you. You're not the only man in the world, but I'm the only girl by your side. Then, other than waiting for me to grow up and become a woman, what else can you do?" The cute little girl tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. A satisfied and nervous smile appeared on her face from time to time. She was not worried about the safety of that person at all. "Die? How is that possible? You are my omnipotent brother Su Lo." Inside the villa in the West Mountain compound, After finally successfully calming down her mother's overly frightened heart, she kicked Zouyuhua onto the bed. Zoyu untied her hair and sat in front of the dressing table tiredly. She looked at her haggard face in the mirror. After a long period of silence, that familiar, piercingly cold beauty once again returned to her eyes. She opened the drawer of the dressing table and looked at the little device that Shi Qinghai stuffed into her hand at the Charter Square. She silently thought, if this thing can really avoid the glory of the Charter, then the people who need it the most now are undoubtedly the people of the Empire. The problem is, you are a stupid and ignorant Empire person. Now that you are locked in that damn prison, what damn method can I think of to give you? This was the Qingcheng military prison. During the previous dynasty, it was responsible for locking up dissidents. After the Republic, several heads of the 7 families were locked up here. Among the few presidents who were the toughest to deal with the 7 families, except for 2 who were assassinated, one of them was impeached during his term of office. He was serving time for a corruption case, and the location of his sentence was also here. After the most intense and bloody period of the struggle, the 7 families gradually withdrew from the stage and hid behind the scenes. They reached a compromise with the government, and the situation returned to harmony. Since then, this prison was mainly responsible for locking up the most vicious criminals of the Federation. Those who were locked up in the Qingcheng military prison rarely had a chance to escape. If someone was really lucky or strong enough to escape, then he would definitely do everything he could for the rest of his life. He would rather die than return to this despairing building complex again. Sula had been here before, and then he was pardoned. Now, he was thrown into the Qingcheng military prison for the second time. In history, there were no more than 3 people who had encountered the same fate as him. As for escaping, ever since the Qingcheng military prison was put into use, such a thing had never happened. No matter how omnipotent a person was in human society, once they entered this place, they would be like a vulture that had lost its wings, or a warship that had lost its crystal mine. No matter how hard they struggled, they would never be able to escape this trap. They would gradually be turned into rotten meat or a cold and senseless pile of steel. The heavy magnetic shackles tore at the muscles of his calves, and the pain was like being cut by knives. The sensor lights around his ankles flashed intermittently, warning the surroundings of danger. There was a sensor control bomb in the shackles, and 3 thick alloy handcuffs that looked like metal rings hung on his wrists. The muscle relaxant that the prison doctor had injected into his body began to take effect. The feeling of weakness spread throughout his body, and it became very difficult for him to drag the heavy shackles on his feet. The heavy alloy bracelet on his wrist pulled his weak forearm downwards. It was like an overripe fruit in autumn, and the weight was so heavy that it caused the branches to bend weakly. Sula narrowed his eyes and raised his head with difficulty to look at the lead-like thick clouds above the transparent dome of the prison. He wanted to make history, to be the first person to successfully escape from the Qingcheng military prison, but he had no confidence. He had not even found a clear way to escape. The strong and violent pulling force passed along the noose to his neck, causing him to stagger forward and almost fall. The Major General, the warden, coughed twice and waved his hand to signal his subordinates who were holding the noose to relax a little. He said in a low voice, "It's already very difficult to get you to come out and eat. You'd better not think too much." Sula nodded after a moment of silence. He walked along the magnetic passage to his own table. The crisp sound of metal colliding rang out. On the other side of the transparent wall, the felons who were eating silently looked at the man who was slowly walking past them. They saw his cut short hair pointing to the sky like wild grass, and his beard stubbornly growing roots like a field that had been burned. They all subconsciously put down the cutlery in their hands. For these unforgivable felons of the Federation, this scene was like déjà vu. To be more precise, it was just a boring repetition of the scene from 5 years ago. However, the interval between this repetition was too long. It was more interesting than their daily repetition. It was so long that some of them took some time to remember who he was. "Colonel Sulu, welcome back." One of the felons stood up and shouted at the guy who was struggling to walk on the other side of the transparent wall. Then, two electric arcs hit his body. The military guards walked forward with heavy faces, pulled out the batons at their waists, and began to beat him heavily without mercy. Hearing the sound of hard objects hitting people, Sulu turned around and looked. Looking at the felon who was twitching in pain on the ground with blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth, he remembered that when he was transferred to Chingcheng military prison 5 years ago, it was this person who first smiled at him. In the end, because of this smile, he was locked up in the dark prison for 3 days. He didn't expect that this guy would still be so tough 5 years later. It was probably because the prisoners in this prison, other than challenging the authority of the prison, couldn't find anything else to do to pass the long life that made people want to die but couldn't bear to throw it away. Sulu smiled and waved at the felons of the Federation on the other side of the transparent wall. The speed of his arm waving was very slow, but in the eyes of the Major General behind him, it was as if he saw the slow-moving arm trying to throw something into the ashes to ignite the flame that seemed cold but hid fierce energy. The food in the prison was not bad. Although it was not as good as the food in the front line, the nutrition was guaranteed. The main dish was potatoes with egg white meat, vegetables, salted cucumbers, and an orange. It only took Sulu a short time to finish the food in front of him with the numbered utensils in his hands. But today he ate very slowly and chewed very carefully, as if he was chewing all the energy contained in each grain of rice and each piece of potato and in nutrients that he could absorb and then store them in his body. He ate slowly and thought casually, accepting the fact that he was a citizen of the empire, forgetting the feeling of identity tearing brought by the education in the Federation, and not having the painful struggle of literature and art forever, was a very simple thing to do. However, when the incident happened to a specific individual, it would become more complicated. For example, he had to face the fact that in terms of blood relationship, Macklin and County King Carlton were both his close relatives, and even his close uncles, but they were both killed by him. Would this situation be brought to the court of morality? Sulu put the last piece of potato into his mouth and chewed carefully and even delicately. As his chewing muscles stretched, a mocking smile appeared on his face. No one could judge himself in the court of morality. The problem now had nothing to do with morality. It was only about life and death, and he did not want to die. It was as simple as that. Pushing the plate further away, he took the orange and began to peel it. The white strands under the orange peel were a bit dry. He licked his dry lips and narrowed his eyes. His peripheral vision passed through the transparent wall and fell on the felons of the Federation on the other side. The old man by the window, who was trying to find a few tiny eggs on the orange peel, was called Mend. He was a former professor of the 3 departments of the Federation Military Science Academy, and the best biochemist in the Federation. If it were not for the fact that he used his latest research to break the law and killed his wife's family for no reason, in many people's eyes, he would have won more than 3 Nebula Awards in his life. The bald man who was grinning and looking at him was called George. He looked very simple and honest, but in fact, he was a rare expert in the Federation forces. His hands were stained with the blood of countless enemies and comrades. He was incomparably cruel. This man insisted on calling himself St. George because he believed in a certain primitive religion in the Bermuda Triangle Star region. It was also because of that damned religion that he tore 7 innocent recruits into pieces in the recruit camp. In the court of martial, he insisted that he felt the guidance of the Lord. The man who was smiling innocently like a child was called Charles. He was the most notorious serial killer of prostitutes in the Federation. The first prostitute to die in his hands was his own mother. There was also that handsome middle-aged man who looked like a stone sculpture. What was his name? Sulu frowned and carefully recalled. Oh yes, his name was Tong Jiajin. He was a person that even he himself was afraid of. Sulu suddenly felt that this scene was very strange. As he shifted his gaze, the identities and backgrounds of these men clearly appeared in his mind. It was somewhat similar to the scene when he led Group 7 to the front lines. The only difference was that Xiong Linquan and the others were truly fearless warriors, while these people were truly fearless criminals. Back when he was transferred to the military prison in Allure, he ate with these criminals through the wall. In the shortest time possible, with the help of the old man, he figured out the identities and abilities of these criminals. It was because he wanted to use these people's abilities to escape from prison. However, he was later pardoned by President Pabre. Naturally, these preparations were useless. Who would have thought that they would come in handy again 5 years later? The prison was still the same prison, and the criminals on the other side of the transparent wall were still the same criminals. Other than men's hair that had turned from white to silver, and St. George's bald head that had more scars and wrinkles, the 5 years did not seem to have left any trace. Then he noticed that an old voice was missing from the other side of the transparent wall. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the orange in his hand in silence. The owner of the old voice used to be the spiritual leader of the prisoners in this military prison. His identity was very mysterious. Even the old man couldn't find a more accurate file except for citizen number. If someone could sort out the story of this person, it would be a real legend. But now, he had disappeared in this prison without a trace. It seemed that no one could truly defeat time. War godly Pifu could not, and neither could the unknown old man in the prison. Then, could anyone defeat this prison? His fingers sank into the soft peel of the orange. Sulu frowned and thought for a long time in silence. Suddenly, he put the orange back on the plate and struggled to stand up with the help of the table. He looked at the other side of the transparent wall. As if sensing his gaze, the notorious or guilty prisoners on the other side of the transparent wall collectively raised their heads and looked back at him. Their eyes were either complicated or amused. The guards in the military prison, especially the special forces responsible for guarding Sulu, suddenly became nervous. Orders rang out in the communication system. More than a dozen guards walked towards Sulu, trying to stop him from doing what he was going to do. Sulu did nothing. He just looked at the prisoners on the other side of the transparent wall, raised the shackles in his hands high, and said, "Live a lowly life or die a happy death." There was a deathly stillness in the prison. The cold autumn sun suddenly penetrated the thick, dark clouds, passed through the transparent dome, and shone on his body. A prisoner on the other side of the wall shouted, "Not enough reason." The baton and electric current attacked his body. Before he fell, he shouted to the criminals on the other side of the transparent wall, "Because I want to live." The dialogue between Sulu and the prisoners was written for a long time. It was very hot-blooded, scheming, and evil, but it was seriously inconsistent with the situation, especially because of the time, so it had to be deleted. Today, after returning home, he wrote without rest. He finally wrote 9,000 words. It was very thrilling. It was not a matter of time. The main thing was that he started to feel sleepy at night. If he was any slower, he was afraid that he would fall asleep. He had not updated for 3 days. Of course, he was behind in the monthly votes. It was already very impressive to have so many votes. Now that the cat has started to set off again, I hope that everyone will continue to support him. If he stopped during the double period, he would fall behind again and have to catch up again. It was a very sad thing. But thinking about it, we seem to be used to this situation, and we are very experienced and confident. So let's do it, because I want to continue. Chapter 8:16. The entire world was shocked. Then, before the psychological impact caused by this matter, not a single federal citizen would be in a good mood. Only the federal government would be able to shake off the previous stormy environment in an instant and come to the blazing warmth of the sun. The official residents that held the initiative did not use this opportunity to launch an attack on the hostile forces of the capital ring. Instead, by releasing Shang Xiu and Zhou Yu, he vaguely expressed his attitude to all parties. During the war with the Empire, the Federation could allow internal disputes and even internal strife, but it was not allowed to cause a full-scale conflict. This was the great reconciliation technique that Mr. President was best at. He was used to doing it beautifully, using his own concessions to exchange for more concessions from the other party. In fact, the 7 families in the Federation government did not want a full-scale conflict. Since the bloody period of history, the Federation had been peaceful for too long. If a war suddenly broke out, whether it was the Federation government that had scruples or the families that had been at peace for a long time, it would be very difficult for them to fully mobilize their resources and mentally prepare in this short period of time. Today, in the picturesque manner behind Macho Mountain, on the terrace where one could see the lake and mountains, an important conversation was taking place. Probably because people were on the terrace and did not need to open the door to see the mountains. This conversation was particularly direct. In just a few words, countless winds and clouds gathered. If I remember correctly, this should be the first time Mr. President has entered Macho Mountain. Lady Tai gently stroked the smooth handle of the coffee cup with her fingers and smiled at the middle-aged man across the table. President Pabre's expression was calm. He raised his right arm and casually waved as he replied, "It is very convenient to come, but what identity do I have to come with? I have not figured out this identity before, so it is not convenient for me to visit Madam." Lady Tai's smile gradually disappeared. She clearly understood what the other party wanted to express. 5 years ago, in the Federation election, Macho Mountain chose to support Pabre, who was still a member of Parliament at the time, and even accepted Pabre's harsh conditions because Macho Mountain thought highly of him. However, in the 5 years after he became president, Mr. Pabre had not taken a single step into Macho Mountain. Identity was indeed very important. Was he the president of the Federation or the president of the back mountain? Pabre was unwilling to visit this picturesque landscape as someone who was supported, even if he was a collaborator. Until today, when the government he led finally had enough strength, or perhaps qualifications, to accept the invitation as the president of the Federation. I can understand the ambition of a politician, even your dream of being re-elected 3 times. Lady Tai said in a slightly mocking tone, "But I really didn't expect your ambition to be so far beyond that. You even want to overturn all of us old guys." President Pabre's voice was deep, and his eyes were clear and threatening. "Madam, I know what you're thinking. 5 years ago, you surprisingly chose to work with me. Was it just because I had the support of the 3 major unions and some worthless resume? No, it was because Madam had long seen what kind of person I was. You knew that once I became the president of the Federation, I would definitely have some intentions. I would want to leave behind something different in history. I don't deny that after the end of the next term, I want to change the election law and the Constitution and try to become the first president in the history of the Federation to be re-elected 3 times. However, during these 5 years, you seem to have always expressed tacit approval and support for this plan of mine. Why?" President Pabre calmly looked at Madam and continued, "Because you need a powerful partner to be the first to break the hard and cold provisions of the Constitution. As long as you get used to breaking them, then the follow-up will become very simple." A faint mocking smile hung on his thick lips. "After I'm re-elected 3 times, the Crown Prince should have just finished his 2 terms as a state legislator and a member of the Federation Management Committee. You definitely want him to become the youngest president in history. Then, since I, the former president, can be re-elected, why can't President Tai be re-elected? When the time comes, how many times do you want him to be re-elected? 2, 3, or 4 times? Or should I say, let him continue until the glory of the Tai dynasty is restored?" President Pabre's eyes were serious and burning as he stared at Lady Tai's face. He was full of pressure. "Madam, when it comes to ambition, you are the woman with the greatest ambition in the universe." After being unceremoniously exposed by Mr. President, the ultimate goal of her silent operation for the rest of her life, Lady Tai's eyes turned cold for an instant. She immediately returned to normal and picked up the teacup to take a few sips. "Ambition must be matched with equal power. You dare to try to rewind history and return to the era of the reactionary dynasty. Maybe you really think that you are the woman with the most power in the universe." President Pabre looked at the exposed, late autumn lake forest. A trace of indifference flashed across his dark face. "But please don't forget that I am the president of the Federation. Mr. President, I think that in the past 5 years, whether it is me or those old guys, we have invested enough goodwill and support in you, the elected president. Lady Tai looked at his side profile quietly. After a moment of silence, she said, "It has always been you trying to obtain more things. Those things have even exceeded the limits that a rational person should have." What limits? Who set these limits? Why does the Federation government have to abide by formless limits? Or do you still think that your words can be as powerful as the Magna Carta or the Supreme Court's rulings? President Pabre looked at her mockingly. His tough tone softened a bit. He said, "Madam, you were wrong about one thing at the beginning. My government and I have never thought of overturning you. We just hope that the way this society operates can become more reasonable. The mining preparations for the mining of the Galaxy X have already begun. If there are no problems with the plan, we can start harvesting in about 2 years. These mining planets of the Empire are resources that the Federation forces have exchanged with their lives and blood. But your crystal mining consortium wants to seize the benefits of all the people of the Federation without spending a single cent. This is an extremely unreasonable method." At this point in the conversation, Lady Tai's calm eyes finally began to blossom with a sharp light. She looked at the president coldly and said extremely slowly, "The Crystal Mining Consortium naturally owns all the crystal mining resources in the entire universe. We cooperate in all aspects according to the needs of the government. This is the iron law that the Tai family and the government reached at the beginning of the Republic when we were willing to peacefully give up the throne and all the power. This iron law was even written into the secret Magna Carta. It has been enforced for thousands of years. No government has dared to violate it. Mr. President, your request is a bit too much. Iron law, or perhaps it is more appropriate for us to call it a shameful deal," President Pabre refuted in a deep voice. "Regardless of whether it is a deal or an iron law, this is history." Lady Tai looked at him with a serious expression and said very seriously, "Mr. President, I am very clear that it is very difficult for a person with such a strong heart like yours to develop feelings of reverence. But for history, it is best for you to show more reverence. Madam, can I understand this as some kind of threat?" President Pabre was silent for a very long time. His thick black eyebrows slowly rose up. "You have to understand one thing. This is no longer the era of the Empire. With the release of information, it is very difficult for the 7 great families to forever hide behind the scenes of history. Once the people know the truth behind these deals, what kind of extreme reaction will they have? Is this considered a threat that you and the government are issuing to me, Mr. President?" Lady Tai calmly replied. The president shook his head and said in a soothing tone, "Madam, I am not a radical, violent person like those in Green Dragon Mountain. I also don't want the Federation to fall into turmoil. These things that I am doing, in my opinion, are only some extremely mild requests and measures." Without waiting for Lady Tai to reply, he resolutely raised his right hand and said, "I agree that the 7 great families still have enough privileges. This is already a concession. Then, madam, you and your companions must also express enough sincerity. I will consider your proposal." Lady Tai's expression was indifferent. She raised the cold tea in her hand. President Pabre stood up. Accompanied by his aides, he walked towards the outside of the terrace. Suddenly, he stopped and turned around to add in a deep voice, "I would like to remind the House of Li to stop trying to obstruct the passage of the additional clause of the Golden Fusion algorithm on Parliament Hill. The days of financial oligarchs using mathematical tools that no one can understand and plundering the wealth of the entire Federation are over. If the House of Li Yuan insists on fighting, I don't mind forcibly dissolving the Parliament and changing the election ahead of time." After President Pabre and his aides, as well as the agents of the Special Task Force hiding in the dark left, the terrace of M.O. Chow's manor in the back of the mountain returned to silence. Lady Tai put down the teacup in her hand and quietly walked to the railing. She leaned on the cold white stone railing and looked at the cold scenery of the lake and mountains in silence for a long time. Butler Jean put a pot of hot tea on the table and looked at the back of his wife worriedly. He didn't know what to say to comfort her at the moment. The 7 great families that had accompanied the Federation for tens of thousands of years had finally met a strong opponent. Although they had fought many powerful Federation governments and amazing presidents in the past, the middle-aged man they were facing this time had already demonstrated his absolute control over the Federation society through many things. The biggest difference between this president and the previous presidents was that under his seemingly gentle appearance, there was a strong enough ambition that he didn't hesitate to use special means. What was even more frightening was that through the war with the Empire, the historically weak army had finally stepped onto the stage of history and stood firmly behind this middle-aged man. The 7 great families, led by Mo Cho, had to face a major change that hadn't happened in thousands of years. 5 years ago, when Mo Cho supported Pabre in the election of the Federation president, she probably didn't expect that she was grooming a gravedigger for herself. Secretary Shun looked at the presidential motorcade, leaving the manor with a complicated expression. He quietly walked to the terrace and reported in a low voice, "There will be a 3rd reading of the relevant bill on Parliament Hill in the afternoon. That's what the Lee family should be concerned about." Lady Tai didn't turn her head. Her voice was a bit bleak because of the cold autumn wind. "Right now, I only care about how long Su-lu can live. According to the news from the official residence, Mr. President will sign the order by tonight at the latest. General Lee Jae-do has been waiting in the official residence with the military court's death warrant." Lady Tai was silent for a moment. She turned around and leaned against the railing. She looked at Shun Li and calmly said, "Inform our friends in the Supreme Court and ask them to help delay the time. In addition, the people in the official residence should also move. They should try to delay Su Li's execution as much as possible." Secretary Shin looked at her in surprise. He immediately raised a firm objection. "Madam, Colonel Su-lu has been determined to be a seed of the Empire. If we still maintain a relationship with him, it will easily become a loophole for the government to attack. Also, it is impossible to rescue him from the military prison in Qingcheng. Even if he escapes from the military prison in Qingcheng, it will be meaningless to us. A person of the Empire has 0 value in the Federation. I don't expect Su-lu to survive, but if he can live for one more day, he could delay the attention of the official residence for one more day. We need time now." Lady Tai paused for a moment and said, "Although he is a person of the Empire, he is still valuable to us. Even if the Supreme Court interferes, or even take the risk of mobilizing the people in the official residence, I don't have the confidence that we can delay the execution of Su-lu by the government." After a moment of silence, Secretary Shun gave an honest answer. Lady Tai looked at him quietly for a long time. Her calm eyes were filled with a faint sense of mockery and oppression. She said, "You were sent to my side by the Trinity Association to carry out the most difficult mission. Since you can still convince Pabre and Lee Jae-do to believe that I don't doubt you and still believe you, why can't they believe you more?" Among the idiotic characteristics of the Federation that were often mocked by the royal family of the Empire, the most famous was its cumbersome bureaucratic procedures. This was especially the case in the Parliament Hill, a building full of a rotten and cold smell. Even if it was just reviewing the budget supplemental bill that was urgently needed at the front line, it still had to go through countless troublesome and unnecessary steps. For example, when the hero of the Federation, Colonel Su-lu, was exposed as a spy of the Empire, this was already an ironclad case with irrefutable evidence. But the members of the Parliament Hill still strongly requested that a secret hearing be held. Having just experienced the bitter battle over the additional terms of the financial bill, the members of the Parliament Hill forced themselves to focus their attention again, rubbing their dark circles under their eyes. Right now, there was no one in the Federation who dared to defend Su-lu. Several members of the Parliament, who took the stage to speak one after another, criticized the royal family of the Empire, who was locked in prison, with a stern sense of justice. It seemed that if they did not do so, they would not be able to express their love for the Federation and their hatred for the Empire. It was not known from which corner of the internet that the members of the parliament found the so-called evidence, but they actually brought out countless basins of smelly black water and splashed it on Su Lu without mercy. They did not even let go of the so-called rotten private life of that rock. When the commander of the Iron 7th Division, Du Xiaoqing, responded to the request and reported the process of the pursuit of Su Lu to the members of the parliament, a member of the parliament below the stage seemed to be very wise and suggested a possibility. Commander Xiaoqing, in your opinion, when Su Lu entered the Empire to hunt down Duke Carleton, could it be possible that it was a scheme of the Empire's royal family? He was able to escape Tianjing planet safely. Could it be that he already knew about his background at that time and began to work for the Empire from then on? Du Xiaoqing, who was on the speaker's seat, looked at the pot-bellied parliament member with a cold gaze. After a long silence, he replied, "Idiot." The word idiot reverberated in the grand hall of the Parliament Mountain. That parliament member was so angry that his face turned red, and he almost had a heart attack. More members of the parliament started to discuss animatedly, feeling extremely angry. Du Xiaoqing walked directly to the side hall, not even bothering to look at these parliament members. For a soldier like him, who valued discipline, to actually say the word idiot in a sacred place like the Parliament Mountain meant that the level of idiocy of these parliament members was beyond his imagination. They were completely unable to control their emotions. As a soldier of the Federation, I hate all men of the Empire, and that naturally includes Su Lu. He looked indifferently at Li Feng in front of him and said, "When I was about to kill him, you were the one who stopped me. You should have known what this meant at that time." "I understand," Li Feng replied after a moment of silence. Du Xiaoqing calmly looked at the young colonel who was more than half a head taller than him and said, "My troops and I are about to head to the front line. You must take responsibility for this matter. If Su Lu survives, you owe me a life." Li Feng was silent once more, and then he said those two words again, "I understand. If anyone wants to save him, or if he dares to break out of prison, I will personally kill him." In fact, there were many things that Madman Li still did not understand. For example, how could that fellow who had once eaten and slept with him for many days be an innately evil and cruel citizen of the Empire? For example, why did his aunt show such a fierce attitude towards Su Lu despite knowing that he was a citizen of the Empire? After arriving at the Army Command Center from the Parliament Mountain, he stood at the end of the corridor with his hands behind his back. His posture was as straight as a silent wall, blocking all the officers who tried to enter the corridor. This was because in the office behind him, his aunt and his father were having a conversation that they did not want anyone to hear. You should know very well that if there's only one person left in the Federation who doesn't care if Su Lu is a citizen of the Empire, then it's definitely me. In the room, Jian Shui'er took off the light-colored hood of her sports jacket and calmly spoke to her cousin behind the table. Her beautiful black hair flowed over her shoulders like flowing water, and the brightness in her eyes was like a lake in autumn. However, this lake contained too many complicated emotions, as well as persistence. Li Jiedu, who had just returned from the president's residence, looked at the black hair floating on the other side of the table. For some reason, he naturally thought of how this girl looked like today before she left Philadelphia for the capital and dyed her hair into that strange purple color. Her beautiful face that had been perfect since she was young was always filled with a sweet smile. She would follow his footsteps and hurriedly run along the lakeside, constantly calling out, "Brother Zaidao, Brother Zaidao, Brother Zaidao." More than 10 years had passed, and he was no longer that wooden military instructor who had just gotten married in his middle age. That little girl who was like his own daughter had also become the national idol of the entire Federation. More importantly, like all girls who had grown up, their hearts had already left their own home, and some of them were reluctant to throw themselves into the arms of their loved ones. "Just because he's your fiancé?" Li Jiedu slowly withdrew his gaze and looked at the documents on the table. He said softly, "Don't forget, Su Lu is my uncle's student and also my father's favorite junior. I don't have any personal opinions about him, but he's a citizen of the Empire, so all these relationships will no longer exist. The feelings between you and him, or the private engagement, must also no longer exist. I'm not talking about the engagement. Jian Shui took a step forward. After a moment of silence, she said, I don't care if he's a citizen of the Empire, because half of my blood is from the Empire. Hearing this, Li Jiedu's fingers that were holding the digital pen suddenly stiffened. He slowly raised his head and looked at his sister's face. He asked coldly, Where did you hear this nonsense? This is the truth, right? Jian Shui didn't answer his question. Li Jiedu looked at her expressionlessly. After a long silence, he said, My father said that your mother should be the daughter of the former master fan of the Empire. In other words, your maternal grandfather is my father's teacher. I don't think this needs special attention. But he's still a citizen of the Empire, Jian Shui said stubbornly. Li Jiedu slammed his palm on the table, breaking the digital pen into 3 pieces. He sternly reprimanded, Don't forget that your surname is Li. The blood of the Lees of Philadelphia flows in your body. Even my uncle respects his surname. You must protect the survival of this family and not think about other things. The office was deathly silent. After a long time, Jian Shui slowly buttoned up her windbreaker and said softly, I understand. But can you tell me how you guessed that he's a citizen of the Empire? This question was on the minds of many people. Li Jiedu exposed Su Li's identity as a citizen of the Empire, which directly led to the sudden change of the situation in the Federation. The elders of the big families, who were watching the show with cold eyes, were caught unprepared by this storm. After the incident, they found that this was the most difficult point to understand in the big change of the situation. Even President Pa Bre and Director Chui Zedong of the Bureau of Proclamation didn't understand how Li Jiedu could find hope in the void and discover such a sharp move on the chaotic chessboard. However, out of respect and even awe of Li Jiedu, they didn't ask any more questions. After a moment of silence, Li Jiedu said, Before my father died, he told me that my uncle is still alive. I think you should also know about this. Jian Shui nodded. What can this prove? My uncle didn't stop you from being with Su Lu, which overturned a certain guess of many people, including me. Li Jiedu calmly explained, Su Lu is not his illegitimate son. I never thought about this. Jian Shui lightly shrugged. But I thought about it before, and I believe that the emperor and the princess of the empire must have thought so too. Is this very important? Very important. Li Jiedu gently put down the half of the digital pen in his hand, took a tissue, and carefully wiped his fingers. Because when combined with the power in Su Li's body, it can explain a lot of things. The power called true qi comes from the empire. Even in the empire itself, only the royal family of the empire and the people of the master fan family can cultivate it. When the former master fan visited the Federation, among hundreds of millions of people, only the 2 of us were found to be able to cultivate this mysterious power. I didn't inherit this ability. Even Li Feng had to use medical and physical methods to activate this power. That's why I find it hard to believe that my uncle would wander to Donglin and casually find a genius young man who is suitable for cultivation in that shabby repair shop. The blood of the Lees of Philadelphia can cultivate true qi. This is already a small probability event, probably 1 in 100 million. My uncle so coincidentally found Su Lu. The probability is also 1 in 100 million. Li Jiedu looked at Jian Shui and calmly said, According to the concept of mathematics, a small probability event has a possibility of existing. But when 2 small probability events are added together, the extremely small probability, we can equate it to 0. In other words, it is impossible for it to happen. There may be a repair shop in some corner of the universe, and there may be a genius student in the repair shop. But there must be an internal logical reason why he is such a genius. There are only 2 answers that can explain Su Li's power. Either he has the blood of the Li family in him, or he must be a member of the Empire's royal family. The office was silent again. After a long time, Jian Shui shook her head in confusion. She frowned and asked in disbelief. Could it be? Could it be that you just based on these conjectures, you are sure that he is from the Empire? Conjecture is a good word to use. Li Jie-du replied with a smile. I was indeed guessing, but in the end, the facts prove that I guessed right. If that is the case, it means that I have indirectly exposed his identity and sent him to his death. Jian Shui's expression was gloomy. She forced a smile and looked at her cousin behind the desk. She whispered, Brother, although rumors say that my father is extremely cold-blooded and heartless and doesn't care about anything, I really want to know, since he is alive, are you worried about what he will do this time? After saying this, she covered her face with the hood of her windbreaker and turned to leave. Looking at the closed door, Li Jie-du's mood was extremely complicated. He knew that this was probably the last time his sister would call him brother. He was naturally vigilant about his seemingly omnipotent and terrifying uncle, but his father had already left this world. Who dared to say that they could defeat the unknown strong man of the Lees of Philadelphia? There were still several important links about this whole matter that he had not completely figured out. His uncle should have known that Su Lu was a member of the Empire's royal family, so he chose to stay on the barren Donglin mineral star. What was his intention? From some of the arrangements, it could be vaguely proved that his father should also have some inside information. But why did he ignore it and even try to let Su Lu take over? Was Su Lu the son of the Empire's Huai Fu Chai, or the descendant of the prince who died in the civil strife? After a while, Li Jie-du withdrew his gaze, took out a new digital pen from the drawer, and continued his work. None of this was important anymore, because the young man was about to die. He is my father's only living son, my younger brother. Huai Chaoshu sat on the tourist bench beside the charter square of the Federation. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the fake bronze statue in front of her and the new statue further away. As the famous princess of the Empire, she actually had the opportunity to enter the core of the Federation and see the statue of Li Pifu at such a close distance. It was not hard to imagine what kind of complicated and strange emotions would arise in her heart. However, at this moment, all her emotions were focused on the guy who was said to be secretly imprisoned. Great Teacher, who was wearing the famous winter clothes of the Federation, sat beside her and looked at the statue and the fat pigeons in the square. He observed the expressions of the late autumn tourists, and his eyes were filled with excitement. He murmured at a high frequency that his life was worth it and that he was going to find Skillamo. The two, disguised as ordinary members of the Empire's underground resistance organization, did not need to follow Mu in the hypocritical conversation with the Federation government. The relevant agencies of the Federation government were also very willing to show the glorious history and beautiful scenery of the Federation to these rural barbarians in the left Sky Star Zone. Of course, every member of the underground resistance organization's diplomatic mission was in a real-time status right now. Who knew how many undercover officers of the Military Intelligence Department were hiding around them? Seeing the heavy expression on Huai Caoshu's face, Great Teacher Fan Yuang suddenly pointed at a young Federation couple who was chasing each other among the fallen leaves and said with a smile, "It really can't be seen from the surface, but these human beings have a small chip behind their neck. It seems that the people of the Federation have really gotten used to living with a dog chain, just like how the people of the Empire have gotten used to living under the rule of the royal family. There is no essential difference." The wide characteristic of the hat covered the middle-aged man's handsome face that did not look like a normal person, making his voice a little hoarse. Then, he said with some embarrassment, "I'm sorry about that matter. I really did not expect that the relationship between you two would almost lead to a big mistake." Because they were deep in the capital of the Federation, they knew that every corner and even the air was filled with the radiance of the charter of the Federation. Furthermore, the legendary omnipotent central computer of the Federation could obviously understand the language of the Empire, so the conversation on the bench was exceptionally simple and vague. However, Huai Chaoshu understood why this crazy uncle of hers was apologizing. When the battleship left the Old Moon base and was about to arrive at S1, he had already expressed a similar apology. For this crazy great teacher fan who dared to kidnap the princess of the empire in the name of love, peace, and literature, and tried to use aphrodisiac to make her and Su Lu fuse, such a deep and lasting apology was a rare emotion. It could also be imagined how terrifying that incident was. Even the crazy great teacher fan felt that it was too *king crazy. The imperial family and the great teacher fan manor were, without a doubt, the two places in the universe that had the deepest understanding of the Hakone Jinshi, far above the Lees of Philadelphia. Therefore, when Su Lu was captured and brought to Tianjin, everyone from the emperor to Huai Chaoshi and the great teacher thought that Su Lu was Nasri's illegitimate son without a second thought. It was only when the news of Su Lu and Jian Shui'er's marriage spread that the imperial family suddenly realized that they had made the biggest mistake of their life. The great teacher was embarrassed, ashamed, and afraid that he had tried to make a pair of siblings fall in love with each other to bring peace to the universe. Huai Chaoshi was frustrated that she had brushed past her only biological brother and seemed to have missed him just like that. A black mass of people walked out of the majestic Parliament Hill and walked down the stone steps. The Empire's underground resistance group had ended their visit to the Parliament Hill. Both parties exchanged opinions. Mr. Muin and the members praised the Federation's hospitality. At the same time, they expressed that they had been deeply influenced by the atmosphere of democracy and freedom today. In the future, they would definitely promote such a complete elected system in the Zhuotian galaxy. Huai Chaoshi and the great teacher stood up from the bench and walked towards the stone steps. Through the crowd, she noticed that Mu In nodded subtly and guessed that the Federation had agreed to that request. Her eyes slowly narrowed as she thought to herself that there was finally a possibility. The fleet drove into the heavily guarded West Mountain compound. Mr. Muin, who purposely did not wear a leather coat, walked into the independent building with a solemn expression, followed by several of his entourage. This was an unplanned itinerary. The Federation government had refused many times, but Muin insisted that although Colonel Su Lu had been proven to be a member of the imperial family, with dirty blood flowing from every pore of his body, they once had an indestructible friendship after all. He hoped that the Federation government would respect the insistence of his Zhuotian galaxy men. In the end, they almost reached a dead end. Muin suddenly lowered his request, saying that even if he could not visit Su Lu in prison, he should at least be allowed to visit Miss Zhou. After all, according to the traditions and customs of his Zhuotian galaxy, expressing condolences to the deceased widow was a sacred and inviolable right. It must be said that the Federation government, which knew very little about the Empire, did not have any good ideas when faced with Muin's insistence, traditions, and customs of his Zhuotian galaxy. In the room on the second floor, Zhou frowned as she looked at the three people from the Empire in front of her. She was extremely puzzled. Why did they insist on visiting her, Su Li's widow? That fellow wasn't dead yet. Most importantly, when did she become the lover and the mother of a child that Mr. Muin spoke of, the one that Su Lu couldn't forget during his desperate escape from Tianjin Planet? Please take a seat. She politely invited everyone to sit down. In reality, this was the first time she had seen people from the Empire alive, so it was inevitable that her emotions would be somewhat strange. She did not know what kind of drinks she should serve them. Mr. Muin glanced at Huai Chaoshi with a complicated expression. Even he did not understand what the purpose of this trip was. Zhou keenly sensed that the extremely unassuming skinny young man actually had a position far above Muin's. However, this Muin was the head of the diplomatic mission. So who was this skinny young man? And why was that middle-aged man wearing a hat so impolite and flipping through her books without her permission? The great teacher beside the bookshelf turned around, took off his hat, and bowed to Zhou with a smile. Then, he mouthed the silent sentence to Huai Chaoshi. This beautiful lady is actually not inferior to your sister, who is stranded in Philadelphia. It seems that our crown prince really has good luck with women. Huai Chaoshi understood the great teacher's words. Expressionlessly, she reached into her bosom and took out a few pieces of paper. She placed them in front of Zhou in an extremely secretive manner. Zhou, who was stunned speechless by the handsome face of the Empire's middle-aged man, subconsciously looked down. Then, she was shocked by the few lines of Federation words written on the paper. She almost cried out in shock. 3 simple lines of words were written on the 3 pieces of paper. My name is Huai Chao Shi. Su Lu is my younger brother. You can tell my identity to the Federation government. If not, then you can help me. Once, when I was interviewed by a female newspaper reporter, she said that you like to bury Easter eggs in books. Can you tell me a few more interesting ones? At that time, Qin Yunian had already finished writing a long time ago. I only remember that I buried them, but I can't remember the specific location. Unfortunately, there are also many spies. After I finished writing, I try to dig them all up and exhibit them. The relationship between Huai Chao Shi and Su Lu is definitely one of them. Before and after the 40th chapter of Book 4, Starlight Fleeting Time, the great teacher with bare legs with love locked them in a secret room and drugged them with aphrodisiac. Then, Su Lu mentioned Schiller's 8-part symphony. Now that I look back at the plot of the secret room, it should be more interesting. At that time, many of my friends were talking about pushing them down. In fact, if I recall the plot of the 8-part symphony, I might think of the relationship between the man and woman in the secret room. So, I definitely can't push it down. Otherwise, there will be a big mess. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.